Today we're reading Liber ABA and we're doing the editor's introduction because I actually really enjoy doing these readings, and I thought that this would be perfect and really fun to go through for some morning sessions. So right now we're about to read the editor's introduction. Again, this is Aleister Crowley's Book 4 or Liber ABA. Okay. Book 4 or Liber ABA. It's in 4 parts. Part 1 is mysticism. Part 2 is magic, elementary theory. Part 3 is magic in theory and practice. And then part 4 is Thelema the law. So this is one of those occult classics, so I'm going to start reading this. The editor's introduction. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Magic is getting into communication with individuals who exist on a higher plane than ours. Mysticism is the raising of oneself to their level. Crowley, Letter to Carl Germer, June 21st, 1947. Book 4 was advertised by Crowley as a treatise on magic and mysticism for beginners, formally entitled Liber ABA. In most alphabets that treat letters as numbers, the letters ABA add to 4. Crowley felt that the number 4, being the formula of the book, it was of course to consist of 4 parts. Part 1 was to deal with mysticism and meditation, Part 2 with magical theory, Part 3 with magical practice, and Part 4 with the Book of the Law and its history and the comment, the volume in fact indicated in the book itself, chapter 3, verse 39. Crowley planned to write so that an average reader would find its more abstruse ideas gradually understandable, but he found it difficult to write simply. With his highly developed literary style and a powerful vocabulary, his tendency to assume that readers possess the education and experience to follow his every obscure allusion worked against his goal of teaching occultism to a general audience. Crowley's methods with parts 1 through 3 of Book 4 was to write with his students rather than for them. As he dictated, his collaborator would have him backtrack to clarify as necessary, and the manuscripts were sometimes read by other students and revised further. His principal collaborators on Book 4 were Mary Desty, Layla Waddle, and Mary Butts. Desty and Waddle were given co-authorship credits by Crowley. Crowley named his system of spiritual attainment magic, reverting to the word's archaic spelling with a K, to distinguish the science of the Magi from all its counterfeits. As we will see, his intent in writing Book 4 was not only to restore to magic the respect and honor it commanded in earlier times, it was also to lay the cornerstone of a magico-religious system that would bridge the chasm between scientific skepticism and spiritual revelation. It applied this theoretical basis to the objective proof offered for what Crowley termed the prime postulate of religion, communication with praeterhuman intelligence. This proof is the Book of the Law. Since Book 4 is greater than the sum of its parts when read together, the 4 parts are collected here in one volume for the first time, under the popular title Magic. Taken as a whole, Book 4 is Crowley's most important exposition of the system to which he gave the name. Okay, hold on just a second, because I want to share this. One moment, y'all. What do y'all think about these readings? I think it is a most excellent idea myself. Okay, give me just a minute, y'all. Okay. Almost done, y'all. All right, y'all, so here we go. All right, today we're reading the editor's introduction to Liber ABA, or Book 4. So this is perfect to begin today. We're starting to read Liber ABA, and we're doing the editor's introduction. So, continuing on, Western magic and Oriental yoga have a common origin. The ancient Greeks considered Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, the founder of the science of the Magi, but he was a first millennium BCE reformer who codified existing spiritual traditions rooted in Iranian prehistory. Long before Zoroaster, two separate southerly migrations from a common Indo-Aryan culture to the north gave rise to civilizations with closely related languages and theogonies, but which became identified with different spiritual disciplines. In the east, India developed yoga, a mystical discipline rooted in spiritual traditions of the Vedas. To the west was Iran, which gave us magic, or at least our word for it. The ancients believed these Persian magi also preserved the wisdom of neighboring Chaldea or Babylon. With its correlation of the underlying principles of yoga and magic, Crowley's Book 4 could be said to reunite these twin spiritual impulses. Both yoga and magic preserve features usually attributed to each other. Some forms of yoga employ meditation in conjunction with ritual and sacrificial practices that are survivals of ancient Indo-European Vedic cults. In the West, ecstatic shamanism, or in Crowley's favored usage, energized enthusiasm, developed into the theurgy described by classical authorities, using ritual and invocation to exalt the consciousness of the adept. The goal was communication with divine intelligences to secure assistance in the perfection of the soul. But such practices are a continuum that extends to self-sacrifice, a sacrifice of the mind and soul that could be termed meditation. And quote from Garth Fowden, The Egyptian Hermes, A Historical Approach to the Late Pagan Mind, 1986, page 148, and quote, God is best known and worshipped in the absolute purity of silence. For speech and hearing are sensations, while knowledge of the divine is an experience of a completely different order. But for all the Hermetists' insistence on this point, it is once more plain that they are talking about an ideal, a prescription for the perfected initiate's solitary intercourse with God. In practice, when 2 or 3 sages are gathered together, they find nothing more natural than to offer up a prayer or hymn in praise and thanksgiving. No doubt, vocal and silent praise were in practice regarded as complementary, for how else could one approach the being who has all names, because all things issue from this one Father, and no name, for he is the Father of all? The ancients held that the highest theurgy resulted in ecstatic identification of the magician with the forces invoked, resulting in a trance that was sometimes oracular and revelatory. Crowley writes that those states of mind which result from the practice of yoga are properly called trances, because they actually transcend the conditions of normal thought. At this point, we begin to see an almost insensible drawing together of the path of yoga, which is straight, and, in a sense, arid, with that of magic, which may be compared with the Bacchic dance or the orgies of Pan. Crowley's first essay on magic was the ambitious Bereshit, where he set out to explain the divergences between 3 great forms of religion now existing in the world: Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity, and of adapting them to ontological science by conclusions not mystical but mathematical. This essay was the foundation for his synthesis of mysticism and magic. Meditation is not within the reach of everyone. Not all possess the ability. Very few indeed, in the West at least, have the opportunity. In any case, what the Easterns call one-pointedness is an essential preliminary to even early stages of true meditation, and iron willpower is a still earlier qualification. By meditation, I do not mean merely thinking about anything, however profoundly, but the absolute restraint of the mind to the contemplation of a single object, whether gross, fine, or altogether spiritual. Now, true magical ceremonial is entirely directed to attain this end, and forms a magnificent gymnasium for those who are not already finished mental athletes. By act, word, and thought, both in quantity and quality, the one object of the ceremony is being consciously and constantly indicated. Every fumigation, purification, banishing, invocation, evocation is chiefly a reminder of the single purpose, until the supreme moment arrives and every fiber of the body, every force channel of the mind is strained out in one overwhelming rush of the will and the direction desired. Such is the real purport of the apparently fantastic directions of Solomon, Abramelin, and other sages of repute. When a man has evoked and mastered such forces as Taphthartharath, Belial, Amaimon, and the great powers of the elements, then he may safely be permitted to begin to try to stop thinking. For needless to say, the universe, including the thinker, exists only by virtue of the thinker's thought. And yet one other way is magic a capital training ground for the arahat. True symbols do really awake those macrocosmic forces of which they are the eidola, and it is possible in this manner very largely to increase the magical potential, to borrow a term from electrical science. This wedding of meditation and magic lies at the core of Book 4. Although the order of exposition suggests meditation, Part 1, as a prelude to magic, Parts 2 to 3, Crowley's training curriculum leaves the emphasis in the early stages of work to the preference of the student. An understanding of certain concepts central to Crowley's philosophy is presupposed in Book 4, but many of these are nowhere clearly defined in the book. A thorough review of the development of Crowley's philosophical thought would exceed the scope of this introduction, but a brief outline may help to introduce these concepts as well as shed light on the foundations of his thinking as evidenced in his early writings. The philosophical underpinnings of Book 4 were first given in Bereshit, where Crowley attempts to reconcile noumenon and phenomenon, unity and multiplicity. He posits that this is achieved through the attainment and consciousness of what Buddhists meant by their term nirvana, and Hegel expressed with his pure being as pure nothing. Crowleyan ontology had its genesis when he wrote in Bereshit, "I assert the absoluteness of the Kabbalistic zero." He explains that the cosmic egg from which the present universe arose was nothingness, extended in no categories. He then goes on to describe creation in terms that anticipate the Thelemic cosmology of Chapter 0 of Part 3 of the present work, where the infinitely great Nuit and the infinitely small Hadit conjoin as Rahur Kuit, who includes and heads all things. Now the multiplying of the infinitely great by the infinitely small results in some unknown finite number extended in an unknown number of categories. It happened, when this our great inversion took place from the essence of all nothingness to finity, extended in innumerable categories, that an incalculably vast system was produced. Merely by chance in the truest sense of the term, we are found with gods, men, stars, planets, devils, colors, forces, and all the materials of the cosmos, and with time, space, and causality, the conditions limiting and involving them all. Crowley thus admitted both monotheism and pantheism, writing that, "I have no serious objection to a finite God or gods distinct from men and things. In fact, personally, I believe in them all, and admit them to possess inconceivable, though not infinite power." As it possessed a mathematical foundation, Crowley found that the Kabbalistic tree of life, with its 10 emanations, or sephirot, best expressed the course of creation. He also held that the Sefer Sephirot, the Book of Emanations, describes the gradual evolution of the deity from negative into positive existence. Crowley's Naples arrangement represents a significant advance. Some systems, such as Buddhism, account for the phenomenal universe in terms of consciousness, and others, such as Orthodox science, in terms of matter, energy, and space-time. The Naples arrangement accommodates both and explains their interrelationship. From the Kabbalistic zero discussed above, which itself has 3 phases, emanate the first 3 Sephirot, collectively termed the supernal triad. In his Naples arrangement, Crowley relates these Sephirot to the point line and plane of geometry, introducing the first and second dimensions. These 3 Sephirot, Keter, Chokmah, and Binah, lie outside 3 dimensions, beyond manifest duality, where a thought is only true insofar as it contains its own opposite. They are, in technical terminology, above the abyss, the gulf separating the ideal and actual. This abyss is sometimes represented by an 11th false sephira, Dot. Below the abyss is the 4th sephira, Chesed, the solid of geometry in the Naples arrangement, which introduces the 3rd dimension and the idea of matter. The 5th sephira, Geburah, signifies matter in motion, and thus the 4th dimension of time. The 6th sephira, Tiferet, is where the macrocosm becomes self-conscious as a microcosm, and as the center of the tree of life, this sephira corresponds to the sun. Below Tiferet are the 7th, 8th, and 9th Sephirot, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, defined as being, thought, and bliss in the Naples arrangement, the 3 aspects of Atman, Godhead, in Hindu Vedanta, Sat, or being, Sit, or Chit, thought, and Ananda, bliss. In the Book of Thoth, Crowley comments, and quote, "These ideas of being, thought, and bliss constitute the minimum possible qualities which a point must have if it is to have a real sensible experience of itself. The first idea of reality, as known by the mind, is therefore to conceive of the point as built up of these previous 9 successive developments from 0. Here then at last is the number 10. The 10th Sephira is Malkut, the earth, the point's idea of itself fulfilled in its complement as determined by 7, 8, and 9. Malkut is the kingdom of manifestation. Outside Malkut are the shells of the Klipot, the dead cast-off debris of continual creation. Crowley usually discussed initiation in terms of the ascent of the tree of life, grade by grade, sephira by sephira. This process has several stages that are so frequently referred to in Book 4 that we will introduce them here. The uninitiated individual is blind and bound, a fool, with limited self-awareness and only an inkling of who he really is. As an undeveloped microcosm, he suffers the banality of evil, subject to a senseless and threatening environment among the Klipot. Initiation begins with the candidate entering Malkut as a neophyte, 1 equals 10, a stage marked by the vision of the holy guardian angel. The neophyte may then pass through 3 intermediate grades, 2 equals 9, 3 equals 8, and 4 equals 7, which develop his powers as a microcosm. The AA grade names are meant here. The description here treats of the central crisis of the middle pillar of the tree of life and only alludes to the intermediate grades in passing. These grades are individually described in Appendix 2, 1 star in sight. Taking each sephira in turn by their connecting paths forms what many Kabbalistic texts describe as the serpent of wisdom. The next crisis is that of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, and the sephira Tifereth, the grade of Adeptus Minor, 5 equals 6. Upon achieving this grade, the aspirant must obtain control of the 4 great princes of evil in the world. This grade signifies the harmony of the microcosm and macrocosm and is the realization of the true will and the great work accomplished. The Adeptus Minor may then proceed through an intermediate grade, 6 equals 5, extending his powers into the macrocosm, becoming an exempt adept, 7 equals 4. The next crisis is when the exempt adept becomes a babe of the abyss. This grade signifies the complete identification of the macrocosm with the microcosm, as the aspirant is sworn to interpret every phenomenon as a direct dealing of God with his soul. Deprived even of the guidance of his holy guardian angel, the aspirant will either A. cross the abyss, abolishing the dialectic between macrocosm and microcosm by annihilating the ego, giving the last drop of his blood to the cup of Babylon to become a master of the temple, 8 = 3, or B. hold back and seek to preserve the microcosm's separate existence, becoming a black brother. The black brother's fortress on the frontier of the abyss eventually gives way to entropy, but the master of the temple in the city of the pyramids has a remaining task, for no sooner does one take one's seat, nameless and indistinguishable in the darkness of Nox, than one must cross the outermost abyss and confront him who is the lord of those 4 great princes of the evil things. In Book 4, Crowley frequently refers to his own life and spiritual experience, and the book is easier to follow with knowledge of his biography. Although he gives several autobiographical sketches in Part 4, these were written to set the stage for his account of the reception of the Book of the Law in Cairo in 1904. A different approach to his biography is needed to explore the genesis and creation of Book 4 and give some account of the evolution of its philosophy. It will also be useful to introduce his collaborators and mentors. And by the way, these are actually the Tree of Life showing the Golden Dawn names of the grades. So, blessed. So, anyways, there's that. Yep. Okay. All right. Crowley was raised within a small Quaker sect, the Plymouth Brethren, and his only permitted reading as a child was the Bible, from which he quotes liberally in Book 4. Once on his own, he cast his spiritual net as wide as possible. His first exposure to magic was A.E. Waite's Compendium of Grimoires, the Book of Black Magic and of Pacts, but the work that truly kindled his aspiration was Karl von Eckartshausen's Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, a Christian mystical treatise that indicated the existence of a universal brotherhood of initiates who possessed the key to the unity of all religion. He soon obtained an introduction to George Cecil Jones, a chemist and initiate of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, hereinafter GD, in which his motto was Frater volo noscere, Latin, I will to know. Crowley was initiated as a neophyte in November 1898, taking the motto Perdurabo, Latin, I will endure to the end. The Golden Dawn was then led by its co-founder and principal architect, Samuel Little McGregor Mathers, Frater DDCF. Mathers had assembled a brilliantly eclectic system of magic in which initiates were put through graded initiation rituals, trained in evocation and invocation, taught to scry and the spirit vision, assumed god forms, and make talismans, all as practical applications of the Golden Dawn's theoretical synthesis of Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, geomancy, Enochian magic, and other traditions. Jones gave Crowley his first instructions in magic. And by the way, George Cecil Jones and Crowley would together form the AA in 1907. Okay, but anyways, back to this. Jones gave Crowley, his co-founder of the AA, George Cecil Jones, okay? Jones gave Crowley his first instructions in magic and introduced him to the Book of the Sacred Magic of Obermelin the Mage. Crowley later wrote that this book influenced and helped the Master Therion more than any other, and he considered it the one serious grimoire of the Middle Ages. Crowley soon met and befriended a young magician just 3 years his senior, but vastly more experienced, Alan Bennett. Was born in London in 1872, and his father a civil and electrical engineer, died when he was a boy. Although raised a Catholic, he soon rejected Christianity. The age of 17 found him with a profounder and wider scientific knowledge than that possessed by any youth in England. While a teenager, he experienced a spontaneous Shiva Darshana, one of the highest mystical trances. Hold on. And considered himself a Buddhist by age 18. He was educated at Bath, became an analytical chemist, and experimented with the higher electricity. He immersed himself in occultism under the tutelage of his adoptive father, S.L. MacGregor Mathers, whose Celtic patronym he often assumed. His magical name in the Golden Dawn was Frater Yechior, Hebrew, let there be light. Bennett was crippled by asthma, which probably enforced the poverty in which Crowley found him. He moved into Crowley's London flat, where they studied Kabbalah, mysticism, and ceremonial magic intensively. They shared scientific interests as well. Crowley, too, had studied chemistry at King's College, London. Crowley rose swiftly through the grades of the Outer Order of the Golden Dawn. From neophyte, 0 = 0, to Philosophus, 4 = 7, as Crowley graphically illustrates in his notes to the Tree of Life diagram illustrated in Figure A on page 30. Crowley resolved to undertake the Abramelin operation, and in November of 1899 acquired a house that met the specific requirements of the working, Boleskine House, on Loch Ness near Inverness in Scotland. By New Year's Day of 1900, Bennett had departed for Ceylon, Sri Lanka, both to study yoga and Buddhism and for reasons of health. On January 15th, Crowley traveled to see Mathers in Paris for his 5 = 6 initiation into the Second Order Rosae Rubii et Auriae Crucis of the Golden Dawn, or the Inner Rosicrucian Order. Crowley now formally possessed the grade of 5 = 6, but it was only the outward sign of the true initiation he sought, the knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel. His task was to invoke what different cultures throughout history have called by many names, in varying contexts and with different shades of meaning. The Egyptians had the Ka and the Shait, the Iranians the Fravasi, later Pahlavi Arjamig, the Greeks the Daimon, the Romans, as well as Blake in the Golden Dawn, the Genius, Iamblichus the Autogydes, the Copts the Psyche, the Arabs Al-Ta'um or the Sufi Misal, the Hebrew Kabbalists Yechida, and 19th century authors, for example, Kingsford and Bulwer-Lytton Adonai. Crowley preferred Abramelin's terminology, the Holy Guardian Angel. 1. Because Abramelin's system is so simple and effective. 2. Because since all theories of the universe are absurd, it is better to talk in the language of one which is patently absurd, so as to mortify the metaphysical man. 3. Because a child can understand it. At Boleskine House, he commenced his Abramelin preparations, and wrote his friend and future brother-in-law, Gerald Kelly. At Boleskine House, my first magical operation was devoted to the invocation of that one whom Abramelin calls the guardian angel. As also it is written, so help me the Lord of the universe and my own higher soul, and without the aspiration to, and in a little measure the grasp of this, no white magic is possible. In myself I am nothing, in thee I am all self. Therefore you are not of position to act as master, for you are not yet master of yourself, nor even in communication consciously with that one who hath made you of his habitation. Therefore it is necessary first to reach unto your own Keter, that the influence of the most holy ancient one descend upon you, and then all things will appear easy unto you. But having invoked the highest to the utmost of which you are at present capable, you can then perform other magic to the same extent. You devote 6 moons to the purification of your sphere or aura. Then you can invoke the angel with complete success. Then you can compel the forces of the world, the visible image of the soul of nature, to your service. This operation is so awful that I cannot find any words to tell you of it. I may now say that I have devoted my life since our fortnight at Folkestone to the beginning of it, and the opposition of every plane has been tremendous. Even now the copying of the symbols is so terrible a task that I can barely finish a dozen daily, and it is useless to proceed, and this while avoiding putting any magical force into them in the making. If you wish to try Abramelin, God forbid I should hinder you. But I warn you that for all its apparent simplicity and ease, it will be a bigger job than anything you ever tackled in your life. Crowley, letter to Gerald Kelly, nearly 1900. Before long, the London Temple of the Golden Dawn erupted into schism. Crowley set aside his work on the Abramelin system and became embroiled in the power struggles between the London Temple and Mathers in Paris. He remained loyal to Mathers until the end, but it was not long in coming. The Golden Dawn went rapidly from schism to schism and never recovered. Later that year, Crowley traveled to Mexico, where he became a 33rd degree Mason. And in August 1900, he obtained visions of the first 2 of the 38ers of the Enochian magical system of Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly. These visions were the beginnings of Liber 418, the vision and the voice, completed in 1909 when he obtained the remaining 28 visions. I'm going to read this long footnote here. Crowley obtained the essence of the Abramelin operation and the 8th ether of the vision and the voice on December the 8th, 1909. Crowley wrote Frank Bennett, discussed below in connection with another invocation of the Holy Guardian Angel, and quote, "You are assured of the profoundest sympathy in your endeavor to perform the great operation of Abramelin. It is most important not to neglect any of this warnings, for the operation is one of great danger. As it happens, or rather is ordered, a ritual on Abramelin lines was revealed by the Master in December last. It brings the ritual down to 3 months, only the last fortnight of which needs absolute retirement. The beginning would be practicable for a man in ordinary circumstances, busy all day." On sending Bennett the ritual entitled Liber 8, Crowley added that you will notice that there is no open reference to the convocation of the spirits, but something of the sort is necessary by some strange law. No sooner has one obtained to the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel than one must go forth and face all the legions of the pit. Crowley, letters to Frank Bennett, February 9th and 12th, 1910. Okay. All right. Although a trained magician, Crowley's Golden Dawn experiences left him disillusioned with occultism, and while interested in meditation, he lacked practical experience. In January of 1901, he found a guru in an unlikely guise. He had hitherto known his mountaineering partner, Oscar Eckenstein, to be a rationalist with no experience in mysticism and a distaste for occultism. In Mexico, Crowley suddenly saw an unexpected aspect of his friend. "Oscar Eckenstein came unto me and spake. And he spake not any more, as had been his wont, in guise of a skeptic and indifferent man, but indeed with the very voice and power of a great guru, or one definitely sent from such a brother of the Great White Lodge. Yea, though he spake unto me words all of disapproval, did I give thanks and grace to God that he deemed my folly worthy to attract his wisdom. And after days did my guru not leave me in my state of humiliation, and as I may say, despair, but spake words of comfort, saying, Is it not written that if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light? Adding, In thee is no power of mental concentration or control of thought, and without this thou mayest achieve nothing. Under his direction, therefore, I began to apply myself unto the practice of Raja Yoga, at the same time avoiding all, even the smallest consideration of things occult, as also he bade me. Eckenstein gave Crowley his first visualization instructions, which Crowley supplemented with Raja Yoga practices, meditation, and simple breathing exercises, probably taken from Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, a work cited frequently in Part 1 of Book 4. That August, Crowley traveled to Colombo, Sri Lanka, where Alan Bennett was tutor to the children of P. Ramanthan, the Solicitor General of Ceylon, who later retired as the Shaivite guru Sri Parananda. Ramanthan was Bennett's first yoga instructor, but Bennett was already preparing to become a Buddhist monk, being rather disguised with his Tamil guru. Their reunion was Crowley's first opportunity to sound out Bennett, who had been closer to Mathers than most members of the Golden Dawn, about the state of the Golden Dawn and its chief. Crowley concluded that Mathers had fallen. He immediately set himself to master meditation under Bennett's tutelage. They relocated to Kandy, where Crowley devoted himself completely to asana, pranayama, mantra yoga, and dharana. In early October, after just under 2 months' constant discipline, he achieved his first dhyana. Crowley went on to India, where he wrote 2 important early essays, Bereshit, quoted at length above, and Science and Buddhism. In January 1902, he rejoined Bennett, by then in Burma, Myanmar, preparing for his ordination as a Buddhist bhikkhu. They met again in mid-February to discuss plans for bringing Buddhism to the West. Crowley then returned to India, meeting with Hindu and Muslim sages, while continuing his meditation practices. In May, Bennett took his Upasampada ordination as a Buddhist monk, bhikkhu, with the name Ananda Maitreya, later Ananda Metteyya. By June of 1903, Crowley had returned to Boleskine House in Scotland, but before resuming his meditation practices, he re-examined his position and quote, In the year 1899, I came to Boleskine House and put everything in order with the object of carrying out the operation of Abramelin the Mage. I had studied ceremonial magic for years and obtained very remarkable success. My gods were those of Egypt, interpreted on lines closely akin to those of Greece. In philosophy, I was a realist of the Kabbalist school. In 1900, I left England for Mexico, and later the Far East, Ceylon, India, Balistan, Egypt, and France. Idle here to detail the corresponding progress of my thought. Passing through a stage of Hinduism, I had discarded all deities as unimportant, and in philosophy was an uncompromising nominalist. I may call myself an orthodox Buddhist, with the reservations: 1. I cannot deny that certain phenomena do accompany the use of certain rituals. I only deny the usefulness of such methods to the white adept. 2. Hindu methods of meditation are possibly useful to the beginner and should not therefore be discarded at once necessarily. With regard to my advancement, the redemption of the cosmos, etc., etc., I leave forever the blossom and fruit theory and appear in the character of an inquirer on strictly scientific lines. I don't know why I say it like that. Strictly, okay. Crowley's meditation records end in early July, and a month later he met Rose Edith Scarrett. See Figure B. the recently divorced sister of his friend Gerald Kelly. They quickly married, and after a belated honeymoon in Egypt and Ceylon, the couple returned to Egypt, so Crowley got married. Arriving in Helwan on February 19th, 1904. So Crowley just got married to Rose. Crowley was resolved to study Islamic mysticism. So that's Crowley for you there in Egypt. He's wanted to study Islamic mysticism and found a teacher who was also introduced him to the magical techniques of the Isawa or Isawa. He later wrote that it was to the Sufis that he was, and quote, chiefly indebted for the foundations of his system of skeptical mysticism. So Crowley was really studying a lot of Sufism when he was in the Middle East. 2 days after his arrival in Egypt, he brought his diary up to date. He had reached a turning point. Okay, now I'm quoting Crowley's diary. On August the 6th, 1903, about my work had been interrupted by the arrival of Gerald Kelly the painter. I decided to go over to Strathpfeffer and marry his sister Rose. This I did on August the 12th, having been engaged 19 hours. Our acquaintance had begun in the ideal way, i.e., with more than a little aversion shown. Aleister Crowley kicked, and so did Rose Edith Scarrett. Eros now took matters in hand pretty thoroughly, and Hermes had a different office to that of Hierophant. We started for China via Burma. Arrived in Ceylon, the astral obstacles to a visit to Ananda Maitreya increased, became insuperable. In the Great Pyramid on November the 22nd, I performed a magical ceremony with remarkable results. The king's chamber, he's talking about in the pyramid, the king's chamber being filled with the glory of Yao, and in the morning a practical work with Amun resulted in my wife becoming pregnant. This, on the one hand, my own misfortune on the other, drove us back disguised to Egypt. I am here as Prince Hyo Khan, an ingenious and vastly amusing avatar, and more skeptical than ever. For to say the truth, the follies of Buddhism, as represented by Alan Bennett, and the literary school and the bestialities of Buddhism, as represented by the life of the people of Ceylon, have finished by disgusting me beyond all measure. I can no longer fight wholeheartedly for Gautama. I am about to suck the cosmic egg of the camel thief of Mecca, but convincing in myself that to no great man can it ever be possible to work in any existing system. If he has followers, so much the worse for him. After a month or so, and that's the end of the quote. After a month or so of playing at being an Oriental despot and studying Islamic mysticism, Crowley performed the preliminary invocation, or bornless ritual, on March 16th. Probably only the second performance in Egypt of that Greco-Egyptian ritual since late antiquity. He meant to entertain Rose, who knew nothing of occultism, by showing her the sylphs, the spirits of the element of air. Rose saw no sylphs, but instead began behaving strangely, telling Crowley, "They're waiting for you." On the 17th, and there is Rose, Edith Crowley. She said, "They're waiting for you, Crowley." On the 17th, they successfully invoked Thoth, who appeared and indwelled them, and Rose told Crowley that it was all about the child, and all Osiris. The next day she claimed that it was the god Horus who was waiting for him. After testing her, Crowley became persuaded that she possessed knowledge that could only have come to her by paranormal means. He later recalled, and quote, "She nearly always referred to the authors of these messages as, quote, they. When asked who they were, she would say haltingly and stupidly the gods, or some equally unhelpful term. But she was always absolutely clear and precise as to the instructions. The new eon was to supersede the old. My special job was to preserve the sacred tradition, so that a new renaissance might in due season rekindle the hidden light. Crowley, Magic Without Tears, Letter 75. Crowley was especially moved when she singled out a funerary stele depicting Horus in the Bullock Museum that had the catalog number 666, a number Crowley had identified with since childhood. Sometime between March 23rd and April the 7th, Crowley had the Egyptian of the stele 666 translated into French by an assistant curator at the Bullock Museum, and Crowley made a versified English translation from the French. He accordingly composed at least one, but more probably two invocations of the god Horus. In one of these rituals, he incorporated Rose's specific instructions. This is the supreme ritual. With new respect for her spiritual prowess, he gave her the magical name Owarda the Seer, Owarda being the Arabic for rose. Crowley was aware during the Cairo working that he was in communication with the secret chiefs of the Great White Brotherhood, noting that I am to form a new link to an order with the solar force. There is further evidence that he believed at the time that by forging this link, he would succeed Mathers as chief adept of the order. End quote. Golden Dawn to be destroyed, i.e. publish its history in its papers. Nothing needs buying. I make it an absolute condition that I should attain Samadhi in the God's own interest. My rituals work out well, but I need the transliteration. And here's an image of Ankaf Nakonsu, who was an actual figure. Many passages in Crowley's notebooks for the Cairo working are devoted to developing new magical formulae that would later form the basis for the rituals and ordeals of a new order to succeed the Golden Dawn, the AA. The culmination of the Cairo working came on April 8th, 9th, and 10th of 1904. Following Rose's instructions, Crowley entered the temple at noon each day and wrote down what he heard for an hour. He received a direct voice dictation from an intelligence that described himself as the minister of Harpocrates, named Iwas. This is the book of the law, Liber ABA legis sub figura 220. So, the Egyptian theogony of the Book of the Law includes Nuit, or Nut, Hadit, Bedet, Horus the Behedite, and Rahur Kuit, Re Harakti. Nut is the sky goddess. In the Heliopolitan myth, she is the daughter of Shu, god of the air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture, and the sister of Geb, the god of earth. By Geb she produced 5 children, Osiris, Haroeris, Horus the Elder, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. I'm reading the footnote here. See Barbara Watterson, The Gods of Ancient Egypt, 1984, pages 48 through 50. She is represented in the Stele of Revealing as an outstretched woman in a long dress, arched over with her feet and hands touching the earth. For an illustration of the Stele of Revealing with Crowley's poetic paraphrase. Okay, and then it goes into Behedet. Behedet was possibly the earliest pre-dynastic center of Horus worship, located in the western delta of Lower Egypt. A warlike sky god, Horus of Behedet, originally had the form of a hawk-headed man with bow and arrow and a spear with a triangular point. The sacred name of the temple of Horus of Edfu, a later center of Horus worship, was Bedet, and other cult centers adopted the name. At Edfu, Horus was worshipped in 2 aspects, as Horus the son of Isis in the form of a falcon, and as Horus the Behedite, or Hor-Behedutet, who had the form of a man with a hawk's head crowned with the double crown of Egypt, with 2 plumes and 2 cobras on his head, holding a metal axe, harpoon, and chain. And his aspect is defender of Ra, the sun god. He also appears as a winged solar disk, who would travel the sky, hunting Ra's enemy Set, and was called the He of the dappled plumage. He appears in this latter form in the Stele of Revealing. Crowley rarely emphasizes the traditional Egyptological attributes of these deities, and in his commentary to Liber 418, The Vision and the Voice, Second Aether, he remarks that Hadid is a mathematical expression rather than a god. See the Equinox 4. And then Ra Harakti is a Heliopolitan composite of the sun god Ra and Horus in his solar aspect, and his compound name means Ra and Horus of the 2 horizons, or in another form, Ra and Horus of the horizon. He takes the form of a man with a hawk's head surmounted with a solar disk, and he appears in the Stele of Revealing. Okay, that was a lot of footnote. Back to this. You're welcome. Okay. While still in Cairo, Crowley prepared a typescript and 2 carbons of the Book of the Law from the manuscript. His preliminary Kabbalistic analysis, used to test the coherence of spiritual communications, confirmed it as genuine. He accordingly wrote 15 friends and colleagues to notify them that the equinox of the gods had come. Imagine this, Crowley's writing his friends being like, the equinox is here, it's a new era. That's pretty cool. Okay. He accordingly wrote 15 friends and colleagues to notify them that the equinox of the gods had come. These included Oscar Eckenstein, Alan Bennett, S.L. Mathers, and George Cecil Jones. So Crowley invoked this new eon of Horus, and he's the prophet of the new eon, and he has the Book of the Law. This is the whole story, right? And he's like, oh, it's the new eon. So he writes a bunch of people. So I want to write that again, kind of set the scene. While still in Cairo, Crowley prepared a typescript and 2 carbons of the Book of the Law from the manuscript. His preliminary Kabbalistic analysis, used to test the coherence of spiritual communication, confirmed it as genuine. He accordingly wrote 15 friends and colleagues to notify them that the equinox of the gods had come. These included Oscar Eckenstein, Alan Bennett, S.L. Mathers, and George Cecil Jones. Okay. En route to England, he visited Paris, where he wrote a formal letter to Mathers informing him that the secret chiefs appointed me visible head of the order and declared a new magical formula. I did not expect or receive an answer. So Crowley announced himself as the new head. He's reformulating the Golden Dawn as the AA, which is actually the Golden Dawn on steroids and brought to Thelema. Crowley's actions suggest conviction. But he returned home to Scotland a reluctant prophet, his early enthusiasm swiftly changing to resentment and denial. Crowley and Rose experimented that summer with rituals derived from the magical formulae received in Cairo, but he soon set the work aside, even misplacing the original manuscript of Liber L. Aside from a bout of magical warfare with Mathers, he returned to poetry, traveling, mountaineering, meditation exercises, and routine magical practice. Crowley later recalled that his Golden Dawn colleague, George Cecil Jones, objected to Liber L on grounds of Chapter 3, which he found suggestive of a dirty type of Allah or Jehovah. He himself was bitterly opposed to the principle of the book on almost every point of morality. The 3rd chapter seemed to me gratuitously atrocious. During 1905, that's Crowley saying that. During 1905 to 1907, Crowley issued the 3 volumes of his collected works to date, a process in which writers sometimes assess their own output. Crowley's ambivalence is evident in his plan to append the Book of the Law and related material to Volume 3. He thought better of it before the last volume went to press, but his notes to the text of the surviving proofs quoted below underscore his skeptical attitude at the time. He um, he reproduces the entirety of his visions of the Enochian aethers obtained in Mexico in 1900, noting that, and quote, "This document, a fragment 2 airs out of 30, is interesting as being written by the same hand as Liber L. One may assume the constants as the contribution of the author, the differences as due to inspiration alone," unquote. The question of the contribution of the author in connection with the Book of the Law must have perplexed Crowley. The book incorporated matters known only to him, such as the abrahadabra equals 418 formula, developed in 1904, yet it was dictated by an independent intelligence whose instruction and prophecies he had difficulty interpreting. His early notes allow that several prophecies were in fact fulfilled, but his comment to the instruction that, and quote, "this book shall be translated into all tongues, but always with the original in the writing of the beast," unquote, has a perceptible note of relief, even dismissal. And quote, "The mysterious disappearance of the manuscript rendered the whole work impossible, even had it been desirable," unquote. He did begin writing a comment as stipulated in the book, but much remained perfectly obscure. His successive annotations to the original title page of the manuscript show how his position developed in these early years. Although it states that the book was, quote, "given from the mouth of Aiwass to the ear of the beast on April the 8th, 9th, and 10th, 1904, unquote, he annotated it around 1907, end quote. This manuscript, so this was a note that Crowley put around 1907, end quote. "This manuscript, which came into my possession in July 1906, is a highly interesting example of genuine automatic writing. Though I am in no way responsible for any of these documents, except the translations of the Staley inscription, I publish them among my works because I believe that their intelligent study may be interesting and helpful," unquote. The note was written to explain the Book of the Law's planned inclusion as an appendix to Volume 3 of his collected works. The surviving proofs are in Harry Ransom's Humanities Research Center, University of Texas at Austin, dated September 24th, 1907. Okay, back to this. In October 1909, he commented on this note to explain the apparent contradiction in the statement that, and quote, "it came into my possession in 1906, unquote, explaining that, and quote, "I meant I could be its master from that date," unquote. He had gained a deeper understanding of his relationship to the Book of the Law and its messenger Aiwass, and soon concluded that Liber Legis was not, in any sense usually understood in automatic writing. Crowley became master of the Book of the Law on July 27, 1906, when he achieved the culmination of his Obermelin operation, the knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel. I want to read that again. Crowley became master of the Book of the Law on July 27, 1906, when he achieved the culmination of his Obermelin operation, the knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel. On July 27, 1906. He would later identify his holy guardian angel with Aiwass, the praetor-human intelligence who dictated the book. This was followed that October by Samadhi in the form of Shiva Darshana, the very attainment he had stipulated during the Cairo working as a prerequisite for assuming the office of Chief Adept. Having attained the requisite degree of initiation, from 1906 to 1909, Crowley worked with his former Golden Dawn mentor, George Cecil Jones, formerly Frater VN, now Frater DDS, to fully elaborate the initiatory system of the AA. So this is where Crowley gets together with George Cecil Jones to form the AA. In developing the AA curriculum, Crowley adopted some Golden Dawn teachings with little or no modification. He accepted the essential Kabbalah as taught in the Golden Dawn, but greatly extended its scope. While many of the tables of correspondences in the Kabbalistic reference work Liber 777 derive from Golden Dawn sources, Crowley greatly amplified the work and extended the system to classify comparative religious data. Okay. Crowley taught the Golden Dawn Tarot for decades, but later produced a reformulation, the Book of Thoth, 1944. In which basic attributions were changed and the Golden Dawn designs are but dimly visible. With the Enochian system of John Dee and Edward Kelly, he surpassed the Golden Dawn's teachings by making a thorough study of the original sources. Other practices, such as the Golden Dawn techniques for making talismans, he used throughout his life but omitted to write about in any detail. There is a certain continuity between the AA and the earlier Golden Dawn, but the AA system is much more than a reformed Golden Dawn. The emphasis in AA is on individual rather than group work, and attainments are verifiably real, not ritual formalities. The AA is informed by the initiatory current expressed in the Book of the Law and the other holy books of Thelema, and in addition teaches yoga and meditation, endeavoring to expose its initiates to the mystical and magical systems of all cultures. But the differences have a deeper basis. The Golden Dawn system only initiated to Adeptus Minor, 5 = 6, and its second order, RR at AC, was largely theoretical. As a result of Crowley's research and attainment, the higher grades are elaborated in AA. It is from these higher grades, AA or SS, the formal names of the third order, that the spiritual authority of the order derives. AA thus subsumes the Golden Dawn as its first or outer order, and the RR at AC or Rosicrucian as its second order. AA is both the name for the third order and for the system as a whole. Crowley considered the year 1875 especially significant for 3 interconnected reasons. It was the year of Eliphas Levi's death, his own birth, and the year which the Theosophical Society was founded, 1875. Crowley was born in England 6 months after Levi's death in France, and he believed from an early stage in his career that Levi was his previous incarnation. Eliphas Levi was probably the first truly modern writer on magic. His works were a departure from the grimoires and compendia that had dominated European magical literature since medieval times. Levi developed a theoretical basis for magical phenomena and attempted to reconcile magic with both science and faith in God. Giordano Bruno did much the same in his day, but where Bruno defended his nascent science from hostile religious authority, Levi was defending magic from the new orthodoxy of science. Crowley was well versed in magical and mystical literature, from classical authors through the Hermetica to medieval grimoires such as the Lesser and Greater Key of Solomon. In his early work, he cites Porphyry, Iamblichus, Lowell, D'Abano, Boime, Agrippa, Barrett, and others, but his system owes a special debt to Eliphas Levi. For both magicians, magic is rooted in the development of the will, which Levi termed, and quote, the first arcanum of magical initiation, unquote. Also, although implicit in the works of authors as early as Iamblichus, Levi systematized and interrelated many key occult doctrines, such as the astral light as the mediator or menstruum between the inner will of the magician and the outer world of the elements. His treatment formed the basis for Crowley's more sophisticated approach. The Golden Dawn taught Levi's correlation of the Kabbalistic Sephirot, the elements, and the 22 Kabbalistic paths with their Hebrew letters to the 78 cards of the tarot, with adjustments to correct deliberate blinds introduced by Levi in his published works. Levy's works were also a primary source for H.P. Blavatsky. Crowley thought her foundation of the Theosophical Society, this is Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, this is Madame Blavatsky. Levy's works were also a primary source for Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Crowley thought her foundation of the Theosophical Society in 1875 significant, since that organization first introduced Oriental philosophy, hitherto the domain of a handful of scholars, into Europe and America on a large scale. People were learning about yoga, chakras and things. He considered Blavatsky a high initiate of the grade master of the temple 8=3 sent by the secret chiefs to prepare the way for the new eon. Crowley believed he had been sent repeatedly over many incarnations, and, quote, to bring Oriental wisdom to Europe and to restore paganism in a purer form, unquote. But as Aleister Crowley, he was specially chosen the logos of an eon, end quote. The secret chiefs had chosen me as their representative on account of my comprehensive knowledge of the mysteries, my correct understanding of their real import, and my literary ability. The chief duty which they laid upon me was to publish the secret wisdom of the ages, in such a form that after the wreck of civilization, the scholars of subsequent generations would be able to restore the traditions. I was to issue a compendium of the methods by which man may attain the Godhead. They released me from my obligation of secrecy. See Confessions. Even more striking is the subsequent fate of the original manuscript of the Book of the Law. After Crowley's death, the manuscript passed to his successor, Carl Germer, in America, who died in 1962. I'm reading the footnote here. In 1967, his widow was robbed of a significant portion of the OTO archives. After her death in 1975, the OTO obtained a court order for custody of the remaining OTO archives, but the manuscript of the Book of the Law was missing and presumed stolen. In 1984, the original manuscript, okay. In 1984, the manuscript was rediscovered in the basement of a house in Oakland, California. In 1984, the manuscript was rediscovered in the basement of a house in Oakland, California, by its new owner, Tom Whitmore. With little idea of its true importance or value, he asked the advice of a friend who, as it turned out, was an OTO member. What are the odds? Even when advised of its great value, on the advice of Israel Regardie and others, he generously returned the manuscript to the OTO. Interesting footnote. Okay. Crowley's prolific writing, coupled with the energy of his AA colleague captain, later Major General J.F.C. Fuller, enabled them to issue the first number of the Encyclopedia of Initiation, the Equinox. In spring of 1909, the Equinox first brought the order to the notice of the public. By 1909, Crowley was persuaded that the Book of the Law embodied the spiritual principles governing the next stage of human evolution, and that its reception marked the beginning of a new eon with himself as the beast 666 as its prophet. He published Liber L and the 3-volume set Thelema, and felt his new conviction confirmed by his subsequent rediscovery of the missing manuscript of the Book of the Law in the attic of Boleskine House. After 5 years of loss, he considered its recovery miraculous. And then we just read the footnote where it disappeared and ended up in Oakland, California in a basement. Okay. When Crowley's first wife, Rose, became oracular and acted as the seer of the Cairo working of 1904, she acquired a special and sacred status. Oh, this is important. Crowley, his magical partner, was always like the woman he was with, or his partner. That was his magic partner, you know. Anyways. When Crowley's first wife, Rose, became oracular and acted as the seer of the Cairo working of 1904, she acquired a special and sacred status, that of the Scarlet Woman. an office described in the Book of the Law itself. Her contact with the secret chiefs of the Great White Brotherhood qualified her as the spiritual consort to the Beast 666. By early 1910, Aleister and Rose had divorced, and around this time Crowley met a beautiful young woman who would help him recover from the loss of Rose and assume several important roles in his magical work. Layla Ida Nerissa Bathurst Waddle. This is her. Okay. So Rose went insane, and then she ended up, and then this is Layla Waddle. Okay. Always Crowley's partner, romantic or sexual. That was his magical partner. So Layla Ida Nerissa Bathurst Waddle was born in Australia in 1880. She became a probationer in AA on April the 1st of 1910. She became a probationer of the AA. So again, this is her. Okay. By early 1910, Aleister and Rose... Okay, here we go. Layla Ida Nerissa Bathurst Waddle was born in Australia in 1880. She became a probationer in AA on April the 1st of 1910, taking the name Soror Agatha from the Greek agathos, good, brave, and virtuous. She is better known as Layla, Arabic for night. She was an accomplished classical violinist, a profession, like most others in those days, dominated by men, which often obliged her to play in ladies' orchestras. To an even greater extent than Rose before her, she was Crowley's muse, inspiring a flurry of short stories, poems, and a play in the Equinox, as well as figuring prominently in Crowley's classic The Book of Lies. She also helped inspire The Rites of Eleusis, in which she played violin at Caxton Hall in 1910 with the title of the Mother of Heaven. So again, this is her. This is Layla Waddle. Okay, this is history here. And she was a probationer of the AA in 1910. Crowley spent the summer of 1911 in Fontainebleau with Waddle, whom he later described as Agatha, my concubine, the very soul of love and of music, that had ventured herself from beneath the cross austral, that she might seek me to inspire and comfort me. Crowley's account in his confession shows that it was a remarkably productive summer. His poem, A Birthday, chronicles their year together from August 1910 to 1911, describing a passionate relationship marred by absences and health problems. And, quote, Equinox 1-7, page 419, the poem states that Waddle had turned 26, whereas she had really turned 31. Like Mary Desty, Waddle trimmed 5 years from her stated age. Crowley briefly describes his summer with Layla Waddle in energized enthusiasm. The Equinox 1, page 20, remarking that I was living in excellent good health with a woman whom I loved. Her health was, however, variable, and we were both constantly worried. Keith Richmond's forthcoming biography of Frank Bennett shows that Waddle returned to Australia in the early 1920s after several years in America. In her later years, she taught music in a convent school in Sydney, dying on September the 13th, 1932, at age 51 of uterine cancer after a painful and protracted illness. So, despite the depth of their relationship, and again, this is Layla Waddle, okay? That is so cool. I just love that I can share this stuff with people on the internet and just somehow just be part of or just insert myself into somehow just sharing and passing on the occult and reading such an iconic book. And Despite the depth of their relationship, Layla did not succeed Rose as the Scarlet Woman. Perhaps she lacked the characteristic gift of clairvoyance, talking about like his magical partner. Thus, by the fall of 1911, Rose was still the only Scarlet Woman that Crowley had ever known. It was Rose's commitment to an institution for alcoholism and not their divorce of the previous year that led Crowley to consider the Scarlet Woman an officer replaceable as need arises and the office vacated. These issues are essential to understanding the spiritual import of Book 4, as its creation was the result of a communication from the secret chiefs, the first such communication through a Scarlet Woman since the Cairo working. This new working is known as the Abuldiz working. Abuldiz working. This new working is known as the Abuldiz working. The record of the working introduces a new Scarlet Woman, and although frequently cryptic, and excerpts quoted below, augmented by Crowley's reminiscences from his confession, serve to document the curious genesis of Book 4. And quote, an account of a communication made by Frater Perdurabo, Crowley in 1904, Era Vulgaris, through the seer Owarda, Rose Kelly, is to be found in Equinox 1:7. This Owarda, disobedient unto her high calling, suffered in detail those things prophesied of her, and the final catastrophe, or an equivalent even more terrible, occurred on the 27th of September 1911, Era Vulgaris. At least this catastrophe, dementia, in its most hopeless form, precluded the possibility of her ever serving Frater P as a messenger from the Great White Brotherhood whom he serves. Of the occurrence of this catastrophe, Frater P was ignorant until the 19th, I think it may have been later, if not earlier, of October. Late in the evening of the 11th of October, within a few minutes of midnight, he was taken by the well-known raconteur, Mr. Henry Skene, to the Savoy Hotel in London, and there introduced to a Mrs. Mary d'Este Sturgis. Crowley's reason for attending the party was his desire to meet Isadora Duncan. He recalled the evening in his confessions, and quote, a boisterous party was in progress. The dancer's lifelong friend, whom I will call by the name she afterwards adopted, Soror Viracum, was celebrating her birthday. This lady, a magnificent specimen of mingled Irish and Italian blood, possessed a most powerful personality and a terrific magnetism which instantly attracted my own. I forgot everything. I sat on the floor like a Chinese god, exchanging electricity with her. Okay. Crowley. In Confessions, Crowley refers to Duncan as Lavinia King and Mary d'Este as Soror Viracum. A variation on this anecdote and other bibliographical material are used in Crowley's novel The Moonchild, or Liber 81, where d'Este was the basis of the heroine Lisa La Gifra. Okay. Crowley and d'Este's affair was well underway within days of their meeting, but she returned home to Paris at the end of October. Crowley followed a few weeks later with the idea of taking her to St. Moritz for ice skating. They stopped at Zurich, where at midnight on November the 21st, she began to act strangely, with behavior reminiscent of Rose's, and the initial stages of the Cairo working, so she's acting funny. Crowley recalls what transpired in his confessions, referring to Mary as Viracum, and quote, I was aroused by Viracum being apparently seized with a violent attack of hysteria, in which she poured forth a frantic torrent of senseless hallucination. I was irritated and tried to calm her, but she insisted that her experience was real, that she bore an important message to me from some invisible individual. Such nonsense increased my irritation, but after about an hour of it, my jaw fell with astonishment. I became suddenly aware of a coherence in her ravings, and further that they were couched in my own language of symbols. My attention being thus awakened, I listened to what she was saying. A few minutes convinced me that she was actually in communication with some intelligence who had a message for me. That is from Confessions. The record of the Albuldiz working corroborates this, and quote, "She was in a state of excitement, exhaustion, and hysteria, so fierce and terrible as to be almost alarming to Frater P. Crowley. I must mention that he had hitherto regarded her only as a voluptuous and passionate woman of the world, and perhaps in part as a fellow artist. No thought of her use in his occult work had ever crossed his mind. However, the state had described, one little remove from that of an amorous but infuriated lioness, suddenly and without warning gave place to a profound calm, hardly distinguishable from prophetic trance, and she began to describe what she was, quote, seeing. She was in touch with the head of the 5 white brothers, an entity she described as an old man with a long white beard. He told her, 'Here is a book to be given to Frater P. The name of the book is ABA, and it's number 4. Crowley immediately saw that ABA equaled 4. His interest aroused, he began to test the integrity of the intelligence, employing the techniques discussed in Appendix 3 of the present work. Although Crowley's and Desti's roles superficially resemble the control-medium relationship and spiritualism, the testing and verification techniques, to say nothing of the qualities of the parties communicating, put this kind of astral working in a different class. In a sort of astral equivalent to the Turing test of computer science, the communicating entity is tested by the adept in a kind of dialogue through the seer. Its responses to signs, words, and formulae known to the adept are weighed, and the coherence of the responses checked by Kabbalah. Here's Mary Desti and her son Preston Sturges around 1905. Okay, so there's that. That's around 1905. Okay. That's so cool that I can go through this on my videos finally after all these years. This is a long time coming. Okay. The entity gave his name as Abuldiz, or Abul-Diz. That's the name that the entity gave. But Crowley's attempts to verify his identity were frustrated, in part by Desti. Crowley remarked in his confessions that Mary was, quote, very unsatisfactory as a clairvoyant, unquote. But the record of the working shows that Crowley already viewed it as related to the Cairo working of 1904. The footnote, the complete surviving record of the Albuldiz working appears in the Equinox 4. Number 2, the quotation given here generally omit the footnotes, and the dialogues, what are believed to be Crowley's notes and expansions of abbreviations, are given in italics. So, Abuldiz, and this is quoting from Crowley's record, Abuldiz promised to come and make all clear after 7 days at 11 p.m. P, being told to invoke as before, it is curious that this new revelation should have come at the moment when Liber Legis was ready to be published, and the proofs of the Horus invocation arrived on the very morning of the day when the invocation is to be made. P will test this as follows. He will begin invoking by the Bornless One, and if the seer gets nothing from this, and then does get something from Horus, then good. At St. Moritz, P had the following documents. 1. The Lema. 2. Early Book of Invocation, etc., containing the Bornless One. 3. Book of D's Conjurations, etc. 4. Manuscripts of the AA rituals and some minor manuscripts. 5. The Sefer Sephirot. 6. The Canon and the first draft of Lexicon. 7. Volume 1, Number 6 of the Equinox. 8. Proofs of the Temple of Solomon the King for the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 7, including the Invocation of Horus used in 1904, and 9, the Invocation of Horus in the Book of Results. He then noted new parallels in the Cairo working. Okay, so those are the documents that he had at the time. Dang, that was a long... In the salon of their suite at St. Moritz is a very large and tall mirror, just as there was in their flat in Cairo, where the previous relation took place. Revelation took place. They arrived at St. Moritz on Wednesday, November 22nd. On the next day, the seer found that she had unreasonably brought a perfectly useless article from Paris. It was a robe, an abaya of blue and gold, precisely similar to the one bought for Nuit in the old rituals, save that there is a little red embroidery added. Frater P. has here with him these magical implements: the wand of ebony crowned with the star sapphire and the golden snakes, the robe of a neophyte, the shoe stone of graven topaz, a rosy cross upon a chain of gold and pearls, the bell of electricum magicum, the ring of ... that is hidden under Nox. Crowley began to realize that for a pair of lovers on a skating holiday, they were remarkably well equipped to conduct magical work. He also began to consider Mary as a possible successor to Rose as the Scarlet Woman. My first surprise was to find that I had brought with me exactly those magical weapons which were suited for the work proposed and no others. But a yet more startling circumstance was to come. For the purposes of the Cairo working, Owarda and I had bought 2 abai, one scarlet for me, one blue for her. I had brought mine to St. Moritz. The other was of course in possession of Owarda. Imagine my amazement when Viracum produced from her trunk a blue abai, so like Owarda's that the only differences were minute details of the gold embroidery. The suggestion was that the secret chiefs, having chosen Owarda as their messenger, could not use anyone else until she had become irrevocably disqualified by insanity. Not till now could her place be taken by another, and that Viracum could possess a duplicate of her magical robe seemed a strong argument that she had consecrated by them to take the place of her unhappy predecessor. Crowley then began to seriously plan the working itself. The seer will dress as indicated in Liber Legis 161, Frater P. as is his custom, an incense of Abramelin will be burnt, the room will be ordered in balanced disposition with the mirror as east, the ritual of Hor will be altered to suit the magical costume and arms of P, the invocation to begin at 10:45 p.m. Crowley brought the record up to date on November the 28th, clearly impressed by similarities to the Cairo working. Later that evening, the 7 days specified by Albaldiz having elapsed, he began his invocation. Albaldiz communicated through Mary while Crowley asked questions and kept the record of the working. 10:38, entered robe, kindled incense. So, 10:38, entered, robed, kindled incense. 10:40, lesser banishing ritual. 10:45, began the invocations. Thee I invoke, the bornless one. 10:56, have finished the bornless one, done with great vigor and good success on simple exoteric lines. At 11, Perdurabo says, Cujus nomen est nemo, frater AA ad est. The seer spoke at the same moment. Seer says the white man is here and wants to know what I want. P. Nothing. Did I call him or he me? He called you. But there is 77. Why did he call me? Albaldiz, to give you this book. P. How will it be given? A. By the seer who complains she has no book. P. Do you claim to be a brother of the AA? Again, he's talking to an invisible intelligence. Do you claim to be a brother of the AA? He has AA in black letters on his breast, but they are always running into a 7. What does AA mean? It means all. Give a symbol of further meaning. So he's testing, Crowley's like testing the spirit through Desti. She's like, not really a medium, but... So the thing to understand is that for Crowley, like, he had different magical partners, which are the, like, throughout his life. Okay. So, A, a triangle with something with horns in it, also a key. P, what is a key? What kind of key? A, ordinary wards, but an upward pointed triangle and spirals for the ring. The key of 31, he showing numbers very fast. Ask him to be slower and simpler. 3 long F's. I hold the blue. Give further signs of your identity. For example, are you sapiens dominabitur astris? I see nothing but a skull. Is Deo Duce Comite Pharaoh one of you? Silence. Repeats. No, no, no longer. Soror sapiens dominabitur astris was Fraulein Anna Springle. Oh, the one that supposedly had the cipher manuscripts. The German adept who authorized the founding of the Golden Dawn. Deo Duce Comite Pharaoh was a Golden Dawn motto of S.L. Mathers, and Albudiz's response confirmed Crowley's belief discussed above, that Mathers had broken, or simply failed to establish his link with the secret chiefs. In later sessions, to test the bona fide fides of Albudis and his colleagues, Crowley inquired whether other Golden Dawn initiates were among them. Only one was confirmed, Frater DDS George Cecil Jones, with whom Crowley founded the AA. Apparently satisfied, he asked Albudis for a name of the seer, but she could only get the letters 6. Crowley continued with his inquiries about Book 4. A. Book 4, your instruction to the brothers. P. Then I am not to publish it? A. Give silence again. P. I understand by that I am not to publish it. A. Never, 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 but you are to find it. He was told he could find Book 4 in London, that he should go there, find it, and return it to the brothers. After many futile questions as to exactly where in London he might find it, he was told that the book is to be changed and then sent out again. It has been corrupted. What it's saying, he's saying that this is where Book 4 that I'm reading comes from. He was told by a spirit, one of the brothers of one of the invisible spiritual forces of the AA, he was told to write through Soror Viracum. That's what it's saying. Anyways, he's saying he was basically told by the AA, the Invisible Brotherhood, to write the book. He was told he could find Book 4 in London, that he should go there, find it, and return it to the brothers. After many futile questions as to exactly where in London he should find Liber ABA, he was told that the book is to be changed and then sent back out again. It has been corrupted and must be restored to its pristine glory. He was told to try again on December the 4th, but little concerning Book 4 was obtained during this next session, beyond Mary's mystic name, Viracum. They again adjourned until December 10th. Crowley noted that the seer is convinced of the reality this time, much more than previous time. Let me see exactly what I got myself into with reading all of this. Holy shit. Okay. It's going to be a nice next 3 hours. Okay, nice next... I didn't get myself into too much. I may have to put this into 2 parts. Okay. I am but a man, Okay, we'll read a little more. Here we go. I only lack, what do I lack? Let's see, 5, 8, 30 pages, 29 more pages to go, no biggie. 29 more pages to go. Oh dear God, why? Okay, on the 10th, but I love it. I'm enjoying the hell out of it, though. I might do this into 2 parts. Might be, the better idea. But let me find a good stopping point. What do y'all think about this? Just reading the editor's introduction. Let me see. On the 10th, Crowley again arranged the room ceremonially, but this time employed the invocation of Horus. After much difficulty in reaching Albudis, they asked where they should go to continue the work. And see, Crowley's working with entities, This is spirit model. This is like grimoire, This is spirit model. Anyways, you point to stuff like this. Anyway, okay, P. Shall we R to pay or Yod? Go to France or Italy? Yod. I saw a candlestick with 3 candles, Italy. Shall we be 412, 73, or 434, i.e. 2, 3, or 4, 73? A. How many R's of E after how many revolutions of Earth? 7, and a 7, and then it passed away. Now I see a 9. This seemed to establish that they should go to Italy as a party of 3 and 9 days on December 19th. Crowley then tried to obtain more specific directions over the coming days. Abildus said that Crowley and Viracum were to travel to Rome and point south and undertake a magical retirement to write Book 4. They then made another appointment for the next day, when after much dialogue, Crowley steered the conversation to the subject of Book 4. Tell me about this Book 4 or ABA. It's the most important. You'll find it unexpectedly. When? Wait, be patient, work. Deny nothing. The simplest things mean most. You're on the way. Book 4 means freedom to all. It's the light. So it's interesting, he's talking about how, basically the brothers of AA, told Crowley to write Book 4, or Liber ABA, is what it's saying. They resumed work on the 13th without ceremony, and many questions centered on whether to take Mary's son Preston and the exact site for the proposed retirement. During the session, Viracum signed the AA oath of a probationer, and they made another appointment for the 19th. On December the 10th, Abildus had indicated that they should travel to Italy in 9 days. On the 19th, they were in Milan, where they had the last session with Abildus, for which a record survives. Abildus was asked whether the site of the retreat should be Naples, and replied yes, adding that tomorrow you will find what you seek. Instead of going to Naples, they spent several days fruitlessly searching Rome. So they're searching for a book in Rome. They had went on to Naples, where after more days of searching, Mary had a dream in which he saw the villa intended for their retreat clearly. Alright, y'all. Any of y'all still there with me here? I had to take a little intermission because I do these really long, do these long readings. What the hell? Are you serious, y'all? Hold on, I'll be right back. Hold on a second here. Alright, y'all. Here we go. So, on December the 10th, where was I? On December the 10th, okay. This seemed to establish that they should go to Italy. Okay. Alright. On December the 10th, Abildus had indicated that they should travel to Italy in 9 days. On the 19th, they were in Milan. Be nice to have so much money you can just be like, Spirit said to go to Italy. Let's go to Italy, It must be nice. On December 10th, Abildus had indicated that they should travel to Italy in 9 days. On the 19th, they were in Milan, where they had the last session with Abildus, for which a record survives. Abildus was asked whether the site of the retreat should be in Naples, and replied yes, adding that tomorrow you will find what you seek. Instead of going to Naples, they spent several days fruitlessly searching Rome. They then went on to Naples, where, after more days of searching, Mary had a dream in which she saw the villa intended for their retreat clearly. The next day, her 13-year-old son Preston was due to arrive from his boarding school in Normandy for the Christmas holidays. En route to the station, Mary suddenly directed the driver to take a small side road, certain that the villa was there. Over the protests of the driver and Crowley, who was concerned to meet Preston's train, they pushed on up the steep and increasingly narrow lane as Mary exclaimed over passing landmarks from her dream. Finally, the chauffeur refused to go further. Crowley recalled, on the left was a wide open gate, through which we could see a gang of workmen engaged in pretending to repair a ramshackle villa. Viracum called the foreman and asked in broken Italian if the place was to let. He told her no, it was under repair. With crazy confidence, she dragged him within and forced him to show her over the house. I sat in resigned disgust, not deigning to follow. Then my eyes suddenly saw down the garden. 2 trees close together. I stooped. Their tops appeared. They were Persian nuts. The stupid coincidence angered me, and yet some irresistible instinct compelled me to take out my notebook and pencil and jot down the name written over the gate. Villa Calderazzo. Idly, I added up the letters, 6 plus 10 plus 30 plus 30 plus 1, and 20 plus 1 plus 30 plus 4 plus 1 plus 200 plus 1 plus 7 plus 7 plus 70. Their sum struck me like a bullet in my brain. It was 418, the number of the magical formula of the Aeon, a numerical hieroglyph of the great work. Abildus had made no mistake. My recognition of the right place was not to depend on a mere matter of trees, which might be found almost anywhere. Recognition beyond all possibility of doubt was what he promised. He had been as good as his word. They went on to the station to collect Preston. Crowley described him in his confessions as Viracum's brat, a most god-forsaken lout. Crowley and Mary succeeded in renting the villa, which they considered ideal. The instant I entered, I understood that it was entirely suited for a temple. The walls were decorated with crude frescoes, which somehow suggested the exact atmosphere proper to the work. Preston thought otherwise. Apart from its supernatural features, it had little to recommend it. It was cold and damp. Few of its windows closed properly. It was completely inaccessible, and the plumbing leaked. Once settled into the Villa Calderazzo, Crowley and Viracum began their magical retirement to write Book 4. Crowley describes in his confessions the plan for writing the book. The idea was as follows. I was to dictate, Viracum to transcribe. And if at any point there appeared the slightest obscurity from the point of view of the entirely ignorant and not particularly intelligent reader, in a word, the average lower-class man in the street, I was to recast my thoughts in plainer language. By this means we hoped to write a book well within the compass of the understanding of even the simplest-minded seeker after spiritual enlightenment. Thus, in the space of a few weeks, the main matter of parts 1 and 2 of Book 4 was written. Viracum's prefatory note to parts 1 and 2 adds that these discourses were subsequently rearranged. Besides working on Book 4, Crowley also began to train Mary in the AA practice described in Liber 3 Vel Eugorum, the aim of which was to inculcate automatic vigilance in thought, word, and deed, by, for example, omitting the use of a particular word with lapses punished by a razor cut to the forearm. Crowley practiced a curious variant at the Villa Calderazzo. Preston Sturges recounts that when his mother had a lapse, Crowley solemnly withdrew an open penknife from his robe and raised his arm so that the loose sleeve of his robe fell back to expose his bare forearm, and then with the penknife slashed a small fresh slice, ever the ladder of slices he had already incised into his forearm, cut by cut, for each time mother had a similar lapse of decorum. In Part 2, Crowley quips that Liber Eugorum was one of the most hilariously exciting parlor games for the family circle ever invented. It is perhaps not surprising that, as Crowley put it, the program was cut short. The secret contest between the will of Viracum and my own broke into open hostility. A serial quarrel led to her dashing off to Paris. She repented almost before she arrived and telegraphed me to rejoin her, which I did, and we went together to London. Mary Dusty's affair with Crowley soon ended, and she married Veli Bey, a Turkish fortune hunter, and Crowley's rival for her affections. Years later, reflecting on Scarlet Women Past, Crowley wrote, Awarda candidate number 1 gave me the power to get the book of the law. Viracum number 2 gave me book 4. In part, but broke down, surely through my own great default of faith in her, more than her quite justified distrust of me. We neither of us gave ourselves wholly without reservation to the work. Crowley resumed his affair with Layla Waddle, who, in her preface to Book 4, Part 3, soberly reported that Soror Viracum has now, at the suggestion of the master, entered the harem of a Turk in order to study Mohammedan methods of mysticism and magic. but Desti and Crowley remained friends and colleagues. She continued with her AA work, serving as editor of the last 4 numbers of Volume 1 of the Equinox and contributing several plays written with Crowley. In 1912, Crowley and Waddell became intensely involved in another occult organization, the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, an amalgam of the ancient and primitive rite of Memphis led by the English Masonic authority John Yarker, the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, or Luxor, and other traditions. The OTO's founding Grand Master, Dr. Karl Kellner, 1850 to 1905, is also believed to have had Indian Tantric and Islamic Sufi initiations. The OTO differs fundamentally from AA, and quote, the OTO is, so to speak, the quintessence of Freemasonry, and is run on strictly Masonic lines. There is no question of spiritual advancement as in the AA. It teaches nothing but theoretical and practical philosophy of life and death. There is no question of the attaining of higher states of consciousness. It is true that some of the practices involve what might, on analysis, turn out to be supernormal conditions, but it is not mystical in any ordinary sense of the word. Further, it works almost entirely in groups, and this is what makes the attitude towards money entirely different. Crowley to Gerald York, October 27, 1928. While the OTO historically derives from Freemasonry and is in harmony with its ideals, it does not make Masons in the sense understood by the craft. Unquote. Okay, that's the footnote. Crowley had been made a member of OTO, that's Oriental Templar Order, or an Oriental Templar Order, OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis. Crowley had been made a member of OTO in March of 1910 when the outer head of the order, Theodore Royce, recognized Crowley's Masonic 33rd degree and awarded the corresponding 7th degree of OTO. Crowley later affiliated formally, and in 1912, Royce conferred its highest regular degree, the 9th degree, on Crowley, who then traveled to Berlin for formal investiture as the Supreme and Holy King, the title of the administrative 10th degree for Ireland, Iona, and all the Britons. Waddell and Crowley were the charter members of its sovereign sanctuary of the 9th degree in England. Crowley recounts that, and quote, the Frater Superior of the OTO, at this time Royce, came to me and appointed me Grand Master of the Order in all English-speaking countries of the earth, and special delegate to America. With this he conferred the secret of high magic, which I wanted, easy to operate as a bicycle, and sure of results as a bottle of brandy. It only needed a little intelligent study and practice to supplant all the old methods, which became, as it were, adjutants of the real thing. This secret is the initiated interpretation of sexual magic. Sex magic. This secret is the initiated interpretation of sexual magic held by OTO. As Crowley suggests, the apparatus of ceremonial magic may be dispensed with if their spiritual and physiological correlates are well understood. Crowley gave a sound theoretical basis for this doctrine in his first essay on magic, written in 1903, The Initiated Interpretation of Ceremonial Magic. I am not concerned to deny the objective reality of all magical phenomenon. If they are illusions, they are at least as real as many unquestioned facts of daily life, and if we follow Herbert Spencer, they are at least evidence of some cause. Now this fact is our base. What is the cause of my illusion of seeing a spirit in the triangle of art? Every smatterer, every expert in psychology will answer, that cause lies in your brain. This being true for the ordinary universe, that all sense impressions are dependent on changes in the brain, we must include illusions, which are after all sense impressions, as much as realities are, in the class of phenomena dependent on brain changes. Magical phenomena, however, come under a special subclass since they are willed, and their cause is the series of quote-unquote real phenomena called the operations of ceremonial magic. They consist of 1. Sight, the circle, square, triangle, vessels, lamps, robes, implements, etc. Sound, the invocations. Smell, the perfumes. Taste, the sacraments. Touch, as under 1. 6. Mind, the combination of all these and reflection on their significance. These unusual impressions, 1 through 5, produce unusual brain changes, hence their summary 6 is of unusual kind. Its projection back into the apparently phenomenal world is therefore unusual. Herein then consists the reality of the operations and effects of ceremonial magic, and I conceive that the apology is ample so far as the effects refer only to those phenomena which appear to the magician himself, the appearance of the spirit, his conversation, possible shocks from imprudence and so on, even to ecstasy on the one hand and death and madness on the other. It is not difficult to see how this magical phenomenology could lead Crowley to prefer sexual magic to traditional ritual. Like its ceremonial counterpart, sexual magic engages all of the senses, and these too may be aesthetically programmed in accordance with the doctrine of correspondences that govern traditional ceremonial work. Fired by energized enthusiasm, and focused by the one-pointedness of invocation and yogic discipline, these practices require what Crowley terms the art of uniting the mind to a single idea, both for safety and success. And the outline quoted below, Crowley posits this art as the unifying common denominator between the various branches of yoga and magic. 1. Yoga is the art of uniting the mind to a single idea. It has 4 methods. Jnana Yoga, union by knowledge. Raja Yoga, union by will. Bhakti Yoga, union by love. Hatha Yoga, union by courage. Ad Mantra Yoga, union through speech. Karma Yoga, union through work. These are united by the supreme method of silence. 2. Ceremonial magic is the art of uniting the mind to a single idea. It has 4 methods. The Holy Kabbalah, union by knowledge. The Sacred Magic, union by will. The Acts of Worship, union by love. The Ordeals, union by courage. Add the Invocations, union through speech. The Acts of Service, union through work. These are united by the supreme method of silence. That's from Postcards for Probationers, the Equinox 1, Number 2, 1909. Other early accounts of Crowley's philosophy of yoga and magic include his essay, The Psychology of Hashish, the Equinox, and portions of TSQ written by J.F.C. Fuller in the Equinox. The former is one of his best essays and often overlooked in this context because of its title. The latter is more uneven, and note to his copy, The Equinox, Crowley wrote that I was very sorry to have to print this diffuse, verbose, ill-ordered, flatulent, incomplete, redundant, ill-comprehended. I can't put in 1% of the adjectives that Fuller would, slop. He subsequently, 1924, of the vulgar era, cut out all the useful parts, those taken from my manuscript, and issued the remainder through W.M. Ryder under the title Yoga 1924, Theft and Impudent and Grotesquely Stupid, unquote. Crowley originally intended Part 2 of Book 4 to deal with the theory of magic, and Part 3 with its practice, kind of like Ritual and Dogma of Eliphas Levi. He was so dissatisfied with Part 2 that he changed plans, making Part 3 a treatment of theory and practice. And quote, when I had finished Part 2, I discovered that not only was the book an exceptionally recondite treatise on obscure technical points, but was not even an exposition of magic at all. Magic without tears, indeed. I set myself to repair the omission with Part 3. This should be a really complete treatise on the art and science of magic, and it should be worked out from the beginning, a logical sequence like Euclid. Hence axiom, postulate, and theorems. I supposed even then I could cover the field with another volume comparable in size with the former two. In the spring of 1912, Crowley and Waddell returned to Fontainebleau, where he finished dictating the first draft of Part 3 of Book 4. The OTO figured largely in his magical work at the time, so it is not surprising that the first draft was as much a manual for magicians working in the OTO tradition as that of the AA. Much of the exposition centers on theory and techniques especially applicable to the sex magical praxis of higher OTO degrees, and particular degrees are frequently alluded to or explicitly cited. Parts 3 and 4 were announced I'm going to get some coffee. Hold on a second. What do y'all think about this? Reading... I might as well take my time, I might as well chillax, because we only got about 28 pages left. You know what, though? I like extremism. I like pushing myself to extremes. I like doing something hard. And I like pushing limits. And I like undertaking something, difficult. Even in a small way, like this. So let's push through this, y'all. This is kind of how I see the path in a way. Let's push through this. This seems, I'm going to do it. Yeah. Okay, the sex magical praxis of higher OTO degrees, in particular degrees, are frequently alluded to or explicitly cited. Parts 3 and 4 were announced in back cover advertisements in the Equinox the following year, but by 1914, Crowley had exhausted his inheritance and could no longer privately finance his publications. He soon left Europe for the United States, where he spent the duration of World War I. Crowley recounts the fate of Part 3. End quote. So this is in 1914. Crowley's broke and moved to America, United States, in 1914. I did indeed finish this, even announced publication. It was just going to press when war came along in 1914. I toted the rod around the world with me, excuse my American, and in a fatal hour of weakness, self-mistrust took to showing it to some of my students. Of course, I might have known. They all with one accord began, "Oh, but you haven't said anything about blank." And all the subjects in the world, so I started to fill in the gaps. As I did so, I found any amount more to do on my own, and went on like that for 14 years. The original draft was a work of 16 chapters in manuscript, comprising about 40% of what became the main text, excluding the appendices. The introduction and several chapters remained unwritten. Those chapters that were written were much shorter than their final published versions. Crowley's remarks quoted below suggest that he completed these chapters on his own and revised the book more than once, probably during his American period. As the book took form, its 22 chapters were arranged to correspond with the trumps or atu of the tarot. These early drafts of Part 3 remain stylistically similar to Parts 1 and 2. After 5 difficult years in America, Crowley traveled to Sicily, where he leased a large house near Cefalù that became a Collegium ad Spiritum Sanctum, College of the Holy Spirit, the Abbey of Thelema. In marked contrast to his years in America, where he found few promising pupils, students from around the world gathered in Cefalù to study under him. Given Crowley's writing method, it is not surprising that the revision and completion of Part 3 would take place at the Abbey. He could test his textbook on new students and write or revise to address their questions, Crowley recounts that, and quote, "Although I dictated Part 3 to Layla Waddle, in the spring of 1912, I felt that it was not sufficiently perfect to be published. From time to time I revised it, but it remained unsatisfactory until in 1921 I took it in hand seriously, practically rewrote it, and expanded it into a vast volume, a really complete treatise on every branch of magic." In June of 1921, the novelist Mary Butts and her friend Cecil Maitland arrived from England and joined the OTO and AA. Their arrival stimulated a burst of creativity, inspiring Crowley to begin his revisions of Part 3. Crowley also wrote a new ritual for group workings, Liber 5 vel Reguli. Its performance was referred to by Abbey residents as doing pentagram. Its composition was briefly sidetracked by the lengthy excursus later appended to the ritual, of which Crowley remarked, and quote, "No doubt all this is implied in the ritual which I started to write, but it is hardly suitable as part of the patter. Damn the man who isolated cocaine," unquote. Crowley soon realized that I am more certain than ever that cocaine is no good, under any conditions soever, unless in very small doses and very few of them. This prolonging the agony simply transforms me into a dull, prolix word cobbler. Crowley Unpublished Diary, July 25th, 1921. Some new additions to Parts 3 and 4 and parts of Appendices 2 to 4 are characterized by a breathless prose whose rapid pace and frequent alliteration are attributable to Crowley's cocaine use. Readers may find the abrupt stylistic alternations between earlier passages and these later additions disconcerting, but chemically assisted or not, these later passages stand as some of Crowley's best theoretical writing, and he certainly produced them in rapid succession. I practically rewrote the third part of Book 4. I showed the manuscripts to Soror Roden, Mary Butts, and asked her to criticize it thoroughly. I am extremely grateful to her for her help, especially in indicating a large number of subjects which I had not discussed. At her suggestion, I wrote essay upon essay to cover every phase of the subject. The result has been the expansion of the manuscript into a vast volume, a complete treatise upon the theory and practice of magic, without any omissions. I further added appendices, the first giving an account of the system of initiation of the AA. Next comes a curriculum of the classics of magic and mysticism. Thirdly, I illustrate the text of the treatise by giving actual examples of ritual. Fourthly, I propose to reprint the more important books of instructions of the AA from the Equinox. And finally, I crown the work by Liber Samek, the operation of the sacred magic of the attainment of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, as proved effective in my own experience and confirmed by that of Frater Progradior, for whose benefit I set it forth in writing. Frater Progradior was Frank Bennett, who arrived at Cefalù in mid-July of 1921. A bricklayer from Lancashire, Bennett joined the AA in England in March 12, 1910, taking the motto Sapientia Amor Potentia, wisdom, love, power. He soon immigrated to Australia, where he co-founded the Australian OTO. He later served as the National Grand Master as Dionysius X's degree. So Frater Progradior was Frank Bennett, who arrived at Cefalù in mid-July of 1921. In contrast to the intellectual Mary Butts, he was precisely the type of student Book 4 was originally designed to teach, sincere and hard-working but average. Crowley had helped students attain before him, but Bennett's attainment at Cefalù probably gave him more satisfaction than that of a dozen more brilliantly endowed aspirants. He could now confidently state that magic is for all. I would hate for that to be me, that sucks. As he did in the introduction to Part 3. Poor little thing. As Crowley mentions above, Bennett attained, hey, but he ended up, being National Grandmaster or whatever. Okay. As Crowley mentions above, Bennett attained the knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel at Cefalù by the use of Liber ABA, which Crowley wrote soon after his arrival by adapting an invocation of the higher genius, itself taken from a late antique Greco-Egyptian exorcism rite. That Liber ABA should have the sole instance of an apparent invocation of Satan in Thelemic ritual requires an explanatory digression, as Satan has no particularly prominent place in Thelemic theogony and ritual. Also, to term Crowley a Satanist is to miss the point of his life's work. His self-confessed youthful quote-unquote Satanism owed more to Blake and Baudelaire than Beelzebub. See Confessions. A comparison of Crowley's treatment of Satan with that of William Blake is helpful. In The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Blake wrote that Messiah or Satan or Tempter was formerly thought to be one of the antediluvians who are our energies. Okay. That Liber ABA should have the sole instance of an apparent invocation of Satan in Thelemic ritual requires an explanatory digression, as Satan has no particularly prominent place in Thelemic theogony and ritual. Also, to term Crowley a Satanist is to miss the point of his life's work. His self-confessed youthful quote-unquote Satanism owed more to Blake and Baudelaire than Beelzebub. Most of the evidence for Crowley's alleged Satanism may be found in his Cefalù additions to Book 4, Parts 3 through 4, but these should be read with a careful eye both for his definitions of the terms and for their overall context in Thelemic magic. Crowley's early references to Satan are as rare in his writings as they are in the Bible, a book he knew well. Around 1909, he wrote that, quote, Satan, in Job, is merely attorney general and prosecutes for the crown, unquote. Satan first appears in the Old Testament in the post-exile period as the accuser and agent of God. By the way, in the Kabbalistic zero, you can't have a villain. In the Kabbalah, if all resolves in Keter, like, it just doesn't work Kabbalistically. You can't have dualism resolved in a Kabbalistic zero. Dualism cannot, by definition, exist. I just want to point that out, the elephant in the room, that the Kabbalistic zero just kind of like annihilates all duality. So, throwing that out there, back to the text. Crowley considered the problem in mythological terms as an ancient attempt to isolate the problem of evil through a type of antinomian dualism that made the god Saturn the scapegoat for the ills of the world. Yeah, Saturn, Satan. He wrote in 1915 that, and quote, or said, in the collapse of ancient civilization, when life was no longer understood in its right relation to existence, when the worship of Attis, Adonis, Osiris, and other mutilated and murdered gods became general, Saturn became confused with the Jewish Shaitan. Time, life, and all the conditions of existence were regarded as evil, as the result of malevolence. Otherworldliness had destroyed the simple acceptation of the facts of life with characterized paganism. Okay, Crowley, The General Principles of Astrology. Okay, see references. Crowley is alluding to the transition from the Ion of Isis, or paganism, to the Ion of Osiris. But did the Ion of Horus call for a restoration of the original tradition or a new formula? At Cefalù, he identified Saturn with Set, Shaitan or Satan, as epitomized in Atu 15 of the Tarot, the trump entitled The Devil. The devil is called Satan or Shaitan and regarded with horror by people who are ignorant of his formula and imagining themselves to be evil, accuse nature herself of their own phantasmal crime. Satan is Saturn, Set, Abrasax, Adad, Adonis, Adis, Adam, Adonai, etc. The most serious charge against him is only that he is the sun in the south. What he's saying is that people took a villain figure, made him the ultimate evil, but they just took off a chunk of nature and of their own psyches, of themselves, psychologically, and just chunked it off and called it evil, the bad villain. But really there's nothing is evil within ourselves or within the world, like it just is. Now, it doesn't mean just go and do whatever, but an idea of wholeness, or everything resolves to the Kabbalistic zero, or the not, everything is one, or the psyche is complete. Nothing can be cut off as purely like anti or against the self. All is resolved in the Kabbalistic zero, and there is no part of me that is not of the gods. To put that, he's saying that it's just a perverted concept, when really it just represents the opposite of everything that Christianity teaches, to like obedience to authority and all these things. It's basically just a stamping down, but really it's it's the all. Anyways, I need to not insert my own thing. Let's go back to this. Okay. All right. All right, later in part 3, he stresses that, quote, the devil does not exist, unquote, terming it a false name invented by the Black Brothers to imply a unity in their ignorant muddle of dispersions. But when discussing Saturn years later in the Book of Thoth, Crowley again refers to a lost tradition and again distinguishes Set from Saturn, and quote, it was only the corruption of the tradition, the confusion was Set, and the cult of the dying god misunderstood, deformed, and distorted by the Black Lodge, that turned him into a senile and fiendish symbol. But later in the same work, in discussion of Atu 15, he states that, and quote, Saturn, the ruler of the sign Capricorn, is Set, the ass-headed god of the Egyptian deserts. He is the god of the south. The name refers to all gods containing these consonants, such as Shaitan or Satan. He thus kept the resolve expressed in Book 4 to let names stand as they are, and quote, we have therefore no scruple in restoring the devil worship of such ideas as those which the laws of sound and the phenomena of speech and hearing compel us to vocalize in the group of gods whose names are based around shta. Okay, so basically, let me go into this. First of all, there's too much stuff going on here that some people are going to get lost here. First of all, Crowley's saying that there is no boogeyman. That's not real. Then Crowley said that Christianity is basically taken a part of our own psyche and of the world and put it as evil, bad, other than, when really they just took Set or Apep, or however you want to look at these ancient thousands of years of things. He's took these aspects, these deities, turned it evil, and then later he's saying, well, there's a revival of the tradition, that these things are not. Well, people just need to read, listen for themselves, and draw their own conclusions. We have therefore no scruple in restoring the quote-unquote devil worship of such ideas as those which the laws of sound and the phenomena of speech and hearing compel us to connect with the group of gods whose names are based on sht, or shin and tav, or d, vocalized by the free breath a. For these names imply the qualities of courage, frankness, energy, pride, power, and triumph. They are the words which express the creative and paternal will. So he's now turning this into a principle of, like, ultimately everything is resolved in the Kabbalistic zero, but he's turning this into now like a positive symbol where it's courage and the self and, well, disobedience. Pride, like, self-reliance and what do I want? What is my will? Like, who am I? This self-knowledge and going against authority. And if you think mythologically, an idea of like a demiurge, this idea of rising up against authority, So anyways, these issues had personal implications for Crowley, since it was at Cefalù that he first identified Aiwass, who had dictated the Book of the Law, with his holy guardian angel. He concluded in Part 4 of Book 4 that, and quote, I now incline to believe that Aiwass is not only the god or demon or devil, once held holy in Sumer, and mine own guardian angel, but also a man as I am, insofar as he uses a human body to make his magical link with mankind, whom he loves, and that he is thus an ipsissimus, the head of the AA. The basis for Crowley's identification of Aiwass with Sumer is not apparent from the text of Book 4, but is discussed elsewhere. Okay. The brother referred to is Samuel Aiwass Jacobs. Interesting. Okay, anyways. So, elsewhere, 78. The number of Aiwass, the intelligence who communicated this book. 78. The number of Aiwass, the intelligence who communicated this book. Having only hearing to guide me, I spelt it Aiwass, 78, referring it to Mesla, the influence from Keter, which adds to the same number. But in Anno 14, that's 1918, there came unto me mysteriously a brother. The brother referred to is Samuel Aiwass Jacobs, ignorant of all this work, who gave me the spelling Ios, which is 93, the number of Thelema and Agape, which concentrates the book itself in a symbol. So Aiwass equals 78, 93. Okay. Thus the author secretly identified himself with the message. Aiwass is not, as I had supposed, a mere formula, like many angelic names, but is the true most ancient name of the god of the Yazidis, and thus returns to the highest antiquity. Our work is therefore historically authentic, the rediscovery of the Sumerian tradition. Sumer is in Lower Mesopotamia, the earliest home of our race. Like their relatives, the footnote, like their relatives, it says here, Aiwass is not, as I had supposed, a mere formula like many angelic names, but is the true most ancient name of the god of the Yazidis. Says here, like their relatives, the Kurdish, Chaldeans, the Yazidis, are a cultural survival of older Mesopotamian cultures. The principal Yazidi deity is named Melek Taus. They were termed shaitan worshippers, the devil worshippers, as a pejorative term by their hostile Arab neighbors. A few years before Crowley wrote these passages, there was lively academic debate over the antiquity of the Yazidi god named Taus. Some scholars held that Taus derived from Tammuz, a Sumero-Akkadian god of vegetation, and a youthful Assyrio-Babylonian sun god equivalent to the Greek Adonis. Isia Joseph mounted a lengthy refutation and devil worship of 1919, pages 145. Deriving the name from the Arabic Taus, peacock, now the accepted etymology. Noting that among their own number the ancient name for God is Azad, and from it the name of the sect is derived. Crowley was possibly made aware of these theories by his correspondent Samuel Aiwass Jacobs, and they may form the basis for his thesis quoted above. See also E.S. Drower, Peacock Angel, 1941, Following the work of Crowley's commentator Kenneth Grant, some students assumed that the Yazidis worshipped a deity with the name Shaitan, or worse, hold the Shaitan as a Sumerian deity name. Okay. But anyway, saying Yazidi and like the peacock. And okay. Another brother informs me that Iwas means servitor or messenger, especially a cupbearer, and this in a strict accordance with his function as Logos. Crowley, Introduction to the New Commentary to Liber Legis, the passage quoted is from an unpublished portion of his introduction. At Cefalù, Crowley further identified Iwas with Satan. Not coincidentally, in the same period, he wrote an invocation of the Holy Guardian Angel, Liber Samek, in which he relates Satan to the Hebrew letter Ayin in his interpretive gloss of the ritual. It is an arcanum of initiation that the path of the devil, Ayin, veils Tiferet the sun, where the knowledge and conversation is consummated. As with all arcana, too literal an interpretation of these terms will lead to misunderstanding. Crowley nowhere says that Satan dictated the book of the law, and if he was a quote-unquote Satanist, which most of his students would dispute, it was on his own terms, as outlined above. Crowley was a Thelemite. Given Satanism's ludicrous modern connotation of sociopathic criminality, the term Thelemite Satanist, as has sometimes been done, is slander or libel. Many of the residents of the Abbey of Thelema worked to produce the revision of Part 3 of Book 4, especially Mary Butts, whose help Crowley publicly acknowledged. Leah Hirsig's participation is evidenced by diary records and her manuscript notes and correlations in the typescripts. Crowley's 1921 diary records some of his revisions and additions to Part 3. He wrote a draft of Liber Reguli in July 25th. Notes to TS1 of Part 3 date 1 star in sight, Appendix 2 to July 1921 as well. On August the 2nd, he records dictating a new section of the Magical Link in Chapter 14 to Leah Hirsig. A month later, he dictated an addition to Chapter 10 on knocks or knells, and on September the 4th, he made an addition concerning the oath to Part 1 of Chapter 16. 2 days later, he added a section on alchemy to Chapter 20, continuing the next day with an addition to Chapter 7 on the formula of Aung. On the 10th, he had what he termed complicated jag to write his notes for an astral atlas. Originally part of Chapter 0, but published as Appendix 3, Liber Samek, Appendix 4, also dates from this period, as does 4 of Chapter 18 concerning divination. Crowley also inserted an infamous sentence into his Chapter 12 on the theory of blood sacrifice. He wrote that a male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and suitable victim. He's referring to masturbation, by the way. Noting with evident satisfaction that he had made this particular sacrifice on average about 150 times every year, between 1912 and 1921. This chapter aroused such alarm in one of Crowley's assistants, probably Maitland or Butts, that Crowley added a preamble and an addendum that further cautioned against literal interpretation. There is no passage in Crowley's writings with as many warnings against misinterpretation, yet no passage has been used against Crowley as frequently in life or posthumously. Crowley's choice of metaphorical language was in part an indictment of the hypocrisy of a society in which one could advocate human sacrifice and yet be prosecuted for frankly discussing sex, and as a sexual sacrifice, the sacrifice of oneself spiritually, that is the thinly veiled subject of the chapter. Butts and Maitland left Cefalù on September 16th, and around this time a new draft of Part 3 was assembled that incorporated the new material. Crowley sent it to Charles Stansfield Jones, his AA and OTO colleague in North America, with the hope of publication there. Crowley then returned to completing his new commentary to the Book of the Law, at that time considered integral to Book 4, Part 4, discussed at length below. On October the 27th, he made plans to return to work on Part 3, noting in his diary that I must write Appendices Book 4, Part 3 on my private hexagram, the Mark of the Beast ritual. Also, I must work out Viau properly. The section on Viau or Viau was added to Chapter 5 on November the 22nd, at which time he also wrote a second addition to Chapter 7 on the magical memory. He also wrote up the ritual of the Mark of the Beast, Liber 5 Vel Reguli, from his diary notes on the 26th, but this is probably not the final draft. Charles Stansfield Jones in America had by then given his favorable response to the draft typescript produced in September. Crowley continued to make minor revisions, including dozens of new footnotes in the years before publication. On the publication, I'm going to put a Amazon link. Anyone wants to buy a copy, purchase it through my link, y'all. And I get a commission because monetizing my content. Anyways, on the publication, but I'll give a link, It is a monetized link if anyone wants to purchase. And anyways, I'll do that later. For now, I'm just reading through. But if anybody doesn't have a copy, they want to buy a copy, hell yeah. On the publication of Crowley's, because I'm monetizing my content, on the publication of Crowley's fictional depiction of the Abbey of Thelema, Diary of a Drug Fiend, 1922, the Sunday Express critic James Douglas condemned the book and its author. Soon the Express began a series of lurid exposés on Cefalù, which were given the appearance of substance by an interview with Mary Butts. Crowley disdained to respond publicly, merely protesting that the publisher, Lord Beaverbrook, his name's Beaverbrook, really. But when an Oxford undergraduate, Raoul Loveday, died at Cefalù in 1923 after drinking polluted water, the negative publicity reached as far as Italy, and Crowley was asked to leave by Mussolini's government. He later wrote, and quote, "The explanation of why I left is quite simple and unsensational. Several people who were my guests at the Abbey made imaginative copy out of their visits. Then the fascists came into power, and some foreign newspaper correspondents were asked to leave, and so was I. There was no rough turning out. I was treated with the greatest of courtesy." Crowley, Black Magic is Not a Myth, Sunday Dispatch, July 2nd, 1933. Crowley's belief in the talismanic power of publishing the Book of the Law derives from instructions given him in Chapter 3, and quote, verse 39, "All this in a book to say how thou didst come hither, and a reproduction of this ink and paper forever. For in it is the word secret, and not only in the English. And thy comment upon this, the Book of the Law, shall be printed beautifully in red ink and black upon beautiful paper made by hand. And to each man and woman that thou meetest, were it but to dine or to drink at them, it is the law to give. Then they shall chance to abide in this bliss or no. It is no odds. Do this quickly. But the work of the comment, that is easy, and hadith burning in thy heart shall make swift and secure thy pen." Unquote. Crowley struggled for over 20 years to interpret these verses, and came to believe that the world was moved mysteriously each time it was issued publicly, with wars breaking out 9 months after publication. After the Abul-Diz, he took this stuff seriously. He believed that he was the prophet of the new eon and, world wars, and he believed he was contacted by the chiefs, and anyways. After the Abul-Diz he claimed to. After the Abul-Diz working of 1911, he designated the book described in Liber Legis, Chapter 3, verses 39 through 40, as Part 4 of Book 4, labeled Thelema, subtitled Thelema, the Law. So he sees this as fulfilling that prophecy in the Book of the Law, as publishing Part 4 of Liber ABA Thelema, talking about how it all happened. So, As we shall see, he would write no less than 5 commentaries to the Book of the Law in his struggle to comply with these instructions. From 1919 to 1925, he produced a new comment nearly every year. His first, later named the quote-unquote Old Comment, was probably begun soon after the reception of Liber Legis. It was written in the type of vellum notebook used in the Cairo working, and appears to be a collection of notes written over several years rather than a single composition. It was published in 1912, together with an account of the reception of the Book of the Law, written by J.F.C. Fuller as a serial installment of the Temple of Solomon the King and the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 7. The second and longest commentary is usually called the New Comment. In a retrospective assessment of his American period, 1914 to 1919, Crowley wrote that by late 1918, and quote, "I had an immense amount of material ready for publication. The one critical omission was the comment on the Book of the Law, which I had constantly shirked rewriting. I pulled myself together and went down to Atlantic City for the purpose of getting this done. My idea was to write it inspirationally, which is correct. The only drawback was that the inspiration was forced and feeble. I know now that the writing of this comment must be a definite miracle, parallel with that of the production of the book itself." This comment was continued in Cefalù, Sicily in 1920. Seeking to renew his inspiration, Crowley and his associates at the Abbey of Thelema composed a group ritual, the Cephalodium working, designed to invoke the energies of the new eon to give the magical impetus for the inspired comment. In this rite, Crowley swore the following oath, and quote, "I, the beast 666, hereby and herein most solemnly promise and swear to devote my whole working time exclusively to the completion of my comment on the Book of the Law. 2. I, etc., as before, etc., swear that as soon as the comment is ready, I will take the book and cause it to be printed, bound, and issued in the manner ordained in the book itself, though I leave myself without money to buy my next meal." Unquote. The Book of the Cephalodium Working, published as Appendix 3 of The Fish, 1992. Okay. This comment was where was I? Okay, Crowley commenced writing on December the 13th and had apparently completed a first draft of the comment to the 3 chapters by December the 24th, and this is 1920. And quote, "I applied the formula of the Book of the Law to the solution of the classical antinomies of philosophy. I resolved such triads as being, not being, and becoming into a unity. I identified free will with destiny. I proved that action was impotent and non-action omnipotent. As I went on, new problems constantly presented themselves, and each one in its turn yielded to the law of Thelema. I wrote all these theorems in my magical record. I was greatly assisted in all this work by the constant study of the work of Einstein, Whitehead, Russell, Eddington, and Henry Poincaré, whom J.W.N. Sullivan had recommended to me. They seemed to be on the very brink of discovering those truths which the Book of the Law concealed and revealed. Their passages directed my attention to the Book of the Law. Obscure passages in the text became clear when interpreted as solving the problems of modern higher mathematics. From this huge mass of work, I extracted the quintessence and transferred it to my new comment upon the Book of the Law. This is now an extensive work, and I have not yet succeeded in making a systematic study of the technical Kabbalistic proofs, of those based on the facts of experience which demonstrate that I-Was is an intelligence of an order altogether superior to that of man. The proof of his existence is therefore the proof of the postulate of all religion, that such beings actually exist, and that communication with them is a practical possibility. Thus, apart from the stupendous value of the Book of the Law itself, it opens up a path of progress to mankind which should eventually enable the race to strike off the fetters of mortality, and transcend the limitations of its entanglement with earth. Let me see how I'm doing here. Yep. Okay. But he was ultimately disappointed, writing on December 24th. That's Christmas Eve. I cannot express myself adequately about my sense of failure in this comment. More, I feel that I have not conquered my repulsion to chapter 3. I ask myself, too, have I even tried to carry out the instructions in that chapter? I am utterly wretched about the whole matter. I say, have I not failed absolutely to obey the heavenly vision? On December 29th, he records, current for this work, going today, an oath renewed in public. I spent all night writing on certain matters proper to the comment. 93 pages of the manuscript. It is possible that this passage does not refer to the new comment, but to Genesis Liber ABA, Crowley's spiritual autobiography from birth through the reception of the Book of the Law in 1904. It includes a brief commentary that treats of selected verses of Liber Legis from the perspective of the scribe, as well as an outline of what Crowley termed the principles of exegesis on which I have based my comment. It was probably after this attempt that he wrote, with the hint of weariness in his confessions, and quote, Part 4 is still incomplete. I feel that I cannot publish the comment on the Book of the Law until I am absolutely satisfied with it, and there is still much work to be done, unquote. Crowley worked on the new comment through the fall of 1921 and added postscripts over the ensuing years, but he was disappointed, believing that the comment referred to in Liber Legis, chapter 3, verses 39 and 40 remained unwritten. Crowley was ready to write again in November of 1923, writing from Tunisia to his student Norman Mudd. He detailed his plans and quote, Chapter 3, verse 39 is not easy to carry out, partly because interpretation is obscure or ambiguous. Anyhow, part 4 of book 4 is already written, must be taken definitively as a book to say how thou didst come hither. As to the reproduction, I am prepared to do this immediately. It is up to you to make arrangements. By the time the reproduction is ready, I will have the comment ready. It can then be printed as ordained, and I will keep a supply of copies on hand to give those people at whom I dine. This new comment, his fourth, was written soon thereafter and was entitled the comment called D, often called the Geridensis comment, as it was written at the hotel of Du Gerid in Nefta. Nefta is a small Tunisian town on the saline lake Chott Gerid, an auspicious site for such a work. The ancient name of Chott Gerid was Pallas Tritonis, the birthplace of Athena in Greek mythology, from whence the name Athena Trigogonea. So it's an interesting place for this to be received. And Crowley commented at length on the first 2 chapters only. Of the 3rd chapter, the most difficult for him to come to terms with, much less comment on, he only wrote, The contents of the chapter are instructions to those who are to govern his eon in his name, and these rulers will appeal to me, the beast 666, for a comment upon the text when need is Aum Ha. Crowley apparently remained dissatisfied, but counseled patience when writing to Mudd the following year, and quote, It will be fatal to hurry the work of the comment and associated publications. If these are done perfectly, Thelema may bring to mankind several thousand years of unparalleled spiritual development, but if they are bungled, the eon may collapse in less than 100 years. Unquote. Crowley's dilemma ended suddenly in November of 1925, as he would later explain in Magic Without Tears. In his years of effort to complete Book 4 by writing the comment, he had in truth been producing commentaries, and quote, As to Part 4, the Book of the Law section, the idea was that the volume should comply with the instructions given in L. chapter 3, verse 39. I mistook comment for commentary, a word-by-word exposition of every verse, and much of it I loathed with all my heart, including the Kabbalistic interpretation, a task obviously endless. ... In Paris, read Tunis, in a mood of blank despair about it all, out came the comment, easy, yes, inspired, yes, it is, as printed, the exact wording required, no further cavilling and quibbling, and controversy and casuistry. This fifth and final comment was short and to the point, the comment to the end of all comments. With a stroke of a pen, it placed his earlier commentaries in another class of literature. Crowley considered it divinely inspired, as was predicted in chapter 3 of Liber Legis, and quote, but the work of the comment that is easy and hadit burning in thy heart shall make swift and secure thy pen, unquote. It was therefore placed in Class A with the other inspired works received by Crowley, and its reception made possible Crowley's full compliance with the Book of the Law, chapter 3, verse 39, which he immediately began to undertake. If the commentaries are not the comment, what are they? The year before his death, Crowley would write, and quote, some 25 years ago, I wrote a commentary on the Book of the Law. Over 250,000 words of the most turgid and incomprehensible hogwash ever penned. Certain adventurous spirits, however, have claimed to have found specks of gold in the silt. I have never been able to face the manuscript since it was typed, not even to correct literals. In the early 1920s, Crowley had intended to publish this lengthy quote-unquote new commentary with the historical account of the events leading to the reception of the Book of the Law, Genesis Libri L, produced in compliance with the command of Liber Legis, chapter 3, verse 39, that he write an account of how thou didst come hither. But he neglected to revise references in several works that identified the new commentary as the comment, references that were made obsolete by the reception of the short comment of 1925. One such confusing reference occurs in the new commentary. Unquote. This account is published with this comment itself. The present volume is thus the obedience to this command. Unquote. Crowley is here discussing the early form of Part 4 of Book 4, which he then thought was the account, Genesis Libri L, together with his new commentary. But despite the usage published, the account and his new commentary never appeared together. He only issued his new commentary as a typescript, and Genesis Libri L was eventually included in the Equinox of the Gods, Book 4, Part 4, as discussed below. Okay, hold on just a second, y'all. Y'all still with me? Let me make sure that my phone is charged. Oh man, I want some more coffee, y'all. Alright, let me get this in here. Alright, y'all. Hell yeah. Now we're in business. What's up now, y'all? Alright. Okay. It is a spiritual discipline. Magic. Ye old magic. Gotta have a little discipline. Gotta read a little bit, you know? Gotta make it happen, Captain. Alright. Here we are. I'm holding in my hands Liber ABA, which is an honor to read because this goes back, like, this is an important tome to read Liber ABA. Anyways, this is a big book. This is a big deal to me because I was 21 years old when I first picked up this book. I've never been the same since. Okay, so back to this. Where was I? Many of Crowley's publishing projects have tangled histories, but Book 4's is torturous. Yeah, reading this is a little torture, but it's excellently done. From 1912, when Part 1 was published, Crowley required another 16 years to complete writing it, and fully 24 years to issue all 4 parts, although they were advertised together as early as 1913. The 4-square plan of the book extended to the shape of the first 2 volumes and even to their price. Part 1, Mysticism, and Part 2, Magic Elementary Theory, were published pseudonymously in 1912 and 1913. Like almost all of Crowley's works until this date, they were well produced and strikingly designed, very likely by Crowley himself, as he had largely exhausted his inheritance by 1914. Crowley would have had difficulty issuing the remaining 2 parts, even had they been completed. Okay. When Crowley conceived his ambitious publishing plans with Charles Stansfield Jones in New York in 1918 through 1919, he advertised parts 3 and 4 in the Equinox 3-1. As discussed above, after the Cefalù revision in 1921, he sent the typescript of Book 4, Part 3 to Jones in Chicago, but attempts to raise funds for its publication proved futile. The editing and eventual publication of Part 3, Magic and Theory and Practice, would prove to be an adventure. After Crowley's expulsion from Sicily, his residence alternated between France and North Africa, punctuated by a sojourn in Germany in 1925. By 1928, Crowley was in Paris. And if not exactly a man without a country, he faced an uncertain welcome in England and lived from visa to visa in France. Crowley's students from his Cefalù period had disbanded, leaving him with a small group of dedicated OTO and AA students in America and Germany. He turned to a promising young English student, Gerald J. York, for help in having his books and papers taken out of storage and shipped to England for copying. These included Book 4, Part 3. Early in 1928, he asked York to help with its publication and solicited his views on the book, and quote, "I shall be glad to hear any remarks of yours on Book 4, Part 3, and generally your impressions from week to week of what you read. I thought of a totally new title, for example, Theory and Practice of Magic," unquote. York agreed to help, but soon began suggesting alterations to make the work less controversial. Crowley was at first very diplomatic, and quote, "Part 3, please don't try to edit. Let me do that in proof. Books read so differently from the typescript. Glad of any suggestions, of course," unquote. By mid-March, York had resolved. What gets me is how Crowley, he dedicated everything to publishing. His whole life was studying magic and putting magic out there for people. This was his life. Like, he spent all his money, all that he had. Like, his whole existence was just pushing this out for people. Okay, that's super relatable. Where was I? By mid-March, York had resolved to see Book 4 published, even if he had financed it himself. Crowley was grateful for his generosity, but still held out hope of a professional publisher taking the book. York still objected to parts of Book 4, Part 3, and in preparing the manuscript for the printer, continued to suggest changes. Crowley took pains not to alienate York while deflecting his editorial suggestions, writing in early April, end quote. Editing Book 4, Part 3. Your suggestions may be very valuable. Only remember that things may look different to you in 50 years' time. I shouldn't have passed a lot of that book when I was 25, nor would I now if the date were 1890. But things have moved since then. You are watching the cornered rat reaction of superstition. Don't take those violent outbursts of morality and religion for movements of growth." Unquote. York could never bring himself to accept Liber Legis. He wrote a few weeks later to ask Crowley to mute the claims made for it. End quote. My own instinct is that it is most important to bring our Part 3 openly in such a form that everyone could read it. I believe this could be done by cutting all direct attack on and sarcastic references to Christianity, and too detailed a reference to Part 4, i.e. Liber Legis, its claims, text, and interpretation. He tried to cut all this out. It was too offensive. The seed of thelema, if I may use such a phrase, will then be sown unconsciously. The mere fact that in its present form it is inadvisable to put one's name to it for fear of compromising oneself is to my mind sufficient condemnation of the form." Unquote. York was advising Crowley not to lend his name to the work on publication. By mid-May, Crowley and York were working on the appendices and preparing a subscription prospectus. In June, York tried to place the book with Heinemann, but their editors found some passages troublesome. Crowley wrote, and quote, "The enclosed letter might turn the scale in Heinemann's mind. I'm going to modify the passage against spiritualists. I don't see how Heinemann's can prove or disprove anything about the gods, though." Unquote. See, people thought Crowley was too shocking. They wanted to okay, Crowley, tone it down a little and we could publish it, You just gotta just cut out, You just need to be, yeah. Okay. England's Home Secretary, Joinston Hicks, or Jix as he was called, had learned that Crowley was seeking to publish a major new work. Hicks and his ally, James Douglas, the book reviewer for the Sunday Express, were stern moralists with complementary filthy minds, determined to clean up Britain. Hicks prosecuted authors and publishers whose works threatened moral decency. So this guy is they're raging against any publications that are indecent, okay? Hicks prosecuted authors and publishers whose works threatened moral decency, while Douglas did his best to destroy their critical reputations, as he did in 1922 when Crowley's Diary of a Drug Fiend appeared. York was advised that Hicks would interfere with the publication of Book 4, Part 3. Crowley responded, the Black Brothers, the Black Lodge strikes again. Crowley met Lance Sieveking, a BBC journalist visiting France, who agreed to help with his publication efforts. Sieveking instead made Crowley's manuscripts available to Vivian Burberry, whom he described in the elliptical language typically reserved for members of Britain's secret services. Viv was in the diplomatic corps and at that time was working in the Foreign Office. He was and still is a connoisseur of strange experiences, and just the man to have with you if you aren't quite sure what may happen. He is a large, powerful, and speaks 18 languages. Also, he had brought a naturally baffling manner to such a pitch of perfection that no one who meets him for the first time is able to make a single correct guess about him. Lance Sieveking, the eye of the beholder. Maybe he's more than he seems. Although Sieveking describes the affair as a lark, Burberry's interest was very possibly professional. The two paid a call on York, with Burberry cryptically introduced as Mr. B from the Foreign Office. When they expressed concern that York had fallen under the sway of a potentially dangerous character, York reassured them that his interest in Crowley was only a hobby. He loaned them a selection of Crowley's manuscripts, which they reviewed and found harmless. York and Crowley began to have difficulties over finances, and by September Crowley felt obliged to write and quote, "It was your true will, repeatedly expressed, to get Book 4, Part 3 into press by September 23rd. You went through the manuscript most careful, and removed all possible causes of offense, which makes it hard to understand your about face. As your guru, I am bound to see that you keep your oath. In the circumstances, it will be best if you transfer the £190 to Paris and send me the manuscripts." York wrote the following day, Originally, I thought that the alterations to which you consented for Part 3 could be produced privately. Book 4, Part 3, and the text admittedly skates on very thin ice. The Mark of the Beast ritual has been added, and is, in my opinion, certain to cause trouble. The Mark of the Beast ritual. The next day, York wrote again. Let me see something here. Book 4, and quote, Book 4, Part 3, with its appendices, cannot be published in England with impunity. The Home Office, backed by Beaverbrook, I almost read that as Beavercock, as Beaverbrook in the press, will go for the book. These are people that just didn't want it studied. They didn't want it printed, trying to stop it. They're trying to stop the publication, I thought it was, thought it said Beavercock, but it says Beaverbrook. Book 4, Part 3, with its appendices, cannot be published in England with impunity. The Home Office, backed by Beavercock and the press, Beaverbrook, will go for the book and get it withdrawn. Consequently, publishers will not touch it. Sieveking, who is in a position to know, agrees on this point. Why this should be so, I have not investigated. My information is from the Home Office. I am not prepared to take the risk of privately producing the book myself. If I were a religious fanatic on the subject, I might consider the risk, but I am not. And God, what a, I don't know, little cowardly lion over here, But I am not, and I have at last got what I accept as accurate information as to what the risk is, namely a press campaign and the book taken to the courts if not withdrawn from circulation. To be frank, I am not prepared to face this. If I believed wholeheartedly in Liber 220, it might be different, but I do not. I shall therefore step aside completely. So he just withdrew all his... It's too offensive. He didn't want to take part after he promised to help him publish. Crowley had tried to address York's reluctance to, quote-unquote, accept Liber Legis some weeks earlier. When he joined the AA, York had taken the motto, Volo intelligere, I will to understand, and Crowley reminded him of this, and quote, You should not have tried to accept anything. You should will to understand. Liber Legis has bothered me from the beginning. Crowley saying it bothered him from the beginning. Liber Legis has bothered me from the beginning, Crowley sang. The book is not written from any human standpoint. It takes no account of men's ideas of what is good for them, any more than a surgeon of a patient's pain. You are not initiated to judge at present. You should be content to study for years, for the book is certainly the work of a preterhuman intelligence, and this makes it an unique document. Crowley did some investigating on his own and replied to York in early October, and quote, Sieveking is a personality man for the BBC, calls in important blokes and convinces them the country is lost unless they give a talk. Quite a minor post. I fear we are badly bluffed. Ogden agrees with me about Home Secretary. Jix's bogey game about the suppression of any book. The publisher just thanks God and pockets the shekels. But Jix wouldn't prosecute, if defied openly, of course, where his action is plain persecution, as it usually is. Unquote. York soon regained his resolve, and they continued to seek a British publisher and printer. A few weeks later, Crowley learned that Turnbull and Spears in Edinburgh, who had printed several of Crowley's earlier works, had declined to produce the book unless it was heavily edited. And quote, The Bolsheviks are after us again. The All-High Commissioner of the Soviet in Leningrad disapproves of the manuscript after a month's masterly inactivity, unquote. Wait, what? What are you talking about the Bolsheviks with Interesting, okay. In his next letter, he explains why, and quote, They wanted to edit my manuscripts. All this, there was a lot of political turmoil going on. It's been a while since I've read this. This is pretty cool. I'm glad I'm rereading this and to the public. Okay. They wanted to edit my manuscripts. All this business about Jack being as good as his master is plain Bolshevism, and I will have nothing to do with it. A printer has no... I forgot all this was here. A printer has no right whatever to an opinion about a manuscript given to him to print, except insofar as he is legally responsible. I admit to sharing your anxiety, but it is a mere weakness. Remember that 777 took 2 years to print, and the Goetia 3. There is always every kind of opposition when one is trying to get out this kind of stuff. But by November, Crowley had given up his efforts to print the book in England and asked for a return of the typescript. And quote, I am too busy with the unfortunate developments of this matter to go into the details. The whole thing is clearly to my mind part of the magical opposition to the publication of Part 3 of Book 4. The fantastic nature of the difficulties is evident. The great misfortune is that one has to work with people whose initiation is inadequate. They do not know how to protect themselves from attacks to undermine their loyalty. Unquote. Crowley wrote at length to York, by then somewhat disheartened, to emphasize both need for a work like Book 4 and to persuade York to disregard the negative opinions of those who examine the manuscript, and quote, people generally do want a book on magic. There has never been an attempt at one, anyhow, since the Middle Ages, except Levy's. I don't see why you should expect me to give authorities. I am not one of the scribes. The book is revolutionary. On whose authority did Buddha base his work? We have the world-famous expert, Mr. Arthur Vivian, complaining that the book is not original. We have these other world-famous experts saying that it is so entirely original that it is worthless. And then there is the other world-famous expert, Dr. Henry Bervin, saying that the book has to be read in the light of the authorities from which I have taken it. You are quite wrong, by the way, in thinking of it as having been dictated. It is true that the skeleton was dictated about 18 years ago, but the whole thing has been rewritten repeatedly, and the original dictated portion does not amount to more, I imagine, than 5% of the work. My system is no more traditional than Darwin's. At the same time, he relied to some extent on previous authorities, such as Cuvier, Buffon, etc., and I have presented the occult tradition faithfully, throwing at the same time an entirely new light on it. You cannot answer the criticism because the criticism is nonsense. Incidentally, it is not even true. There are quite a number of references to people like Fraser, Poincaré, Eddington, Einstein, and Levy, and the same time to the great ancient classics of the East. But the point is, as the book itself explains to some extent, that the whole bulk of magical writing in Europe is either hopelessly obscure or nonsense. Do not forget that the tradition which I represent has always been a secret tradition, and that I only publish it today because of the impending catastrophe to our present civilization. Crowley finally turned to the Lecrum press in Paris. He knew that it was easier to print difficult works in Paris. He had done so before. He arranged for an edition of 3,000 copies in 4 parts by private subscription, with the first part scheduled to appear in the spring equinox of 1929. In mid-January, a police inspector from the prefecture in Paris visited Crowley. God, it's just... man, so much trouble just to publish a book. Very different from nowadays. Just upload to Amazon. People click and buy. Yeah, it's a little different. Going through a little bit of trouble here to get this out. But this is, the technology and then the narrow-mindedness. And people are like, oh, this is offensive, this book. Anyways. In mid-January, a police inspector from the prefecture in Paris visited Crowley. So he's getting cops visiting him. And a month later, his residency permit was revoked. On March the 8th, Crowley and his entourage, his mistress and future wife, Marie Teresa de Ferrari Miramar, and his secretary, Francis Israel Rigardi, were given 24 hours to leave France. So Israel Rigardi, too, is secretary. The police, here comes the coppers, get out of town, Crowley. And Israel Rigardi, too. In late March, Crowley wrote to York and quote, my medical certificate expired Saturday the 23rd. Yet I hear no news so far. The fight is taking place on the back stairs. I'm pretty sure also that we can get the decree annulled, and we could assume the counteroffensive and insist on a showdown. See, he's wanting to publish the book. He's fighting to publish this book, to just make it available to people. If this is done, it means a fortune for magic, and I don't doubt this whole outrage is a plan of the gods. It is damned hard sticking to this lonely fort when it would be so delightful to go and comfort the exiles and get nursed. But I just have to keep on with the lawyer and the printer. Never before in my life have they asked of me quite such an ordeal." Unquote. It is a wonder Crowley was able to read proofs amid such upheaval, but he recorded in his diary on April the 12th, and quote, "Advance copy magic arrive, 5:55 p.m., victory." He wrote York the next day, "Rejoice, we conquer. Advance copy received, nothing else matters," unquote. The first part of Magic and Theory and Practice, being Book 4, Part 3, had been published at last. Crowley left for Brussels 5 days later. An investigator from Scotland Yard, Colonel Carter, met with York in London. After receiving assurances that Crowley bore little resemblance to their intelligence reports, Carter paid Crowley's fare to England, and after an amicable dinner he was left in peace. After years of harassment by the press and governments of Europe, moving from country to country like a latter-day Bruno, Crowley was back in England where, except for periods spent in Germany and Portugal and unrealized plans to immigrate to California, he would remain until his death in 1947. Book 4, Part 3 was still not completed. Crowley was still reading proofs of its appendices in July, and outstanding bills kept the book at the printers in Paris. Finally, in February of 1930, Crowley wrote to P.R. Stevenson, the editorial director of his new publisher, the Mandrake Press in London, and quote, this is in 1930. "It is absolutely urgent that I should put over this deal with regard to magic. We have to get it away from the French printers, and we have to satisfy our subscribers, there being already considerable delay about the book. I think that it is a good test of the genuineness of the belief in the success of my work that this, the cornerstone of the whole of my occult publications, should be well and truly laid without any further delay." Unquote. The Mandrake Press arranged to have the printing completed and the book shipped to England, where a quantity of copies were issued in 1930 and in a one-volume subscriber's edition. This was in 1930. Far from provoking Home Office legal action or a furor in the press, Magic and Theory and Practice was received quietly. After all that, and even elicited a glowing review from Crowley's former AA student, the poet Victor Nuremberg. And quote, "The writer the master theorion is the bad boy of British journalism, Aleister Crowley. This wicked man, vide the press passim, has produced a work that is witty, erudite, profound, and accomplished. The writer's accomplishment is patent. He is a master at any rate of prose. His power of expression is as near perfection as that of any author I have read." Unquote. But Crowley's work was far from over. Book 4 was not yet complete, as Part 4 was yet unissued. He seized an opportunity to do so in 1930. The Mandrake Press had announced Crowley's autohagiography, The Confessions of Aleister Crowley, in 6 volumes, with a 7th offered to subscribers, and volumes 1 and 2 appeared in 1929. Crowley then wrote to York, and quote, "I want volume 3 to be devoted exclusively to the Book of the Law, and I want it sufficiently complete to fulfill the instructions given in the book. It is quite reasonable to think that our failure to do this until now is largely responsible for holding up the whole show." Unquote. See, because Crowley believed that there were invisible masters. Crowley saw himself as like a channel for invisible forces, okay? And he found himself in the midst of like world wars, and like he saw himself as like, you know, a man in history trying to get this out and yeah, get his work done. As volume 3 of his Confessions already contained his account of the Cairo working, he decided that it could meet the criteria for Book 4, Part 4 by simply adding the text and photo facsimile of the Book of the Law, together with introductory material from the Cefalù period typescript of Book 4, Part 4, i.e. Genesis Liber L. This effort reached page proofs for the main text, and the appendix with the Book of the Law and its manuscript, Crowley's lengthy commentaries, could be omitted. In keeping with Crowley's interpretation of the preeminence and import of the one-page short comment of 1925, Era Vulgaris, making Part 4 of Book 4 a much shorter work. But the Mandrake was in financial straits, and by July of 1930, the production of Volume 4 was stalled. Crowley wrote to his editor, P.R. Stevenson. Oh, wow. Oh, wow, we're almost done. Dang, y'all. Okay. Did I get through? Wow. Not long ago, I was like 30 more pages. Wow, okay. Here we go. Look here, the whole problem from the magical standpoint lies in our getting our Volume 3 of the Confessions, for the Book of the Law must be published with its comment, and an account of how thou didst come hither in order to start the real machinery of the eon. The Mandrake, I'm almost done, wow, with reading this part. The Mandrake folded, thank y'all for sticking with me on this. The Mandrake folded and Volume 3 of the Mandrake Confessions never appeared, but Book 4, Part 4 was finally sent to press by the OTO in 1936. Mindful of his vexations with Part 3, Crowley attached a note to the typescript, "Printer, attention," and quote, "This typescript is delivered to the printer on the strictest understanding that it will be read through by a responsible director, and his nihil obstat written to me before any contract is to be considered as valid. I am not going to have any printer's objections at the last moment." Unquote. Part 4 appeared under the title The Equinox of the Gods, issued in series as The Equinox, Volume 3, Number 3, an addition to Genesis Liber L. It included the text and manuscript of the Book of the Law, the comment, and the Stele of Revealing. Its introduction, the summons, was originally written circa 1925 for the Tunis edition of the facsimile manuscript, and it also included an extract from Liber 242, the mystery play Aha. The first printing found ready subscribers. George Bernard Shaw was among them, and the trade edition also sold very well. Crowley observed Book 4's completion quietly, and he neglected to title The Equinox of the Gods as Book 4, Part 4 on its title page or in the text, successfully eluding the posthumous bibliographers. He identified it as such several years later, almost in passing. Crowley was rarely wholly satisfied with his books, and Book 4 is no exception. Writing for his Confessions some 10 years after they were first written, he approved of Book Part 1, but viewed Part 2 as only partly successful. Part 1 of Book 4 expounds the principles and practices of mysticism in simple scientific terms, stripped of all sectarian accretion, superstitious enthusiasms, or other extraneous matter. It proved completely successful in this sense. Part 2 deals with the principles and practice of magic. I explain the real meaning and modus operandi of all the apparatus and technique of magic. Here, however, I partially failed. I was stupid enough to assume that my readers were already acquainted with the chief classics of magic. I consequently described each weapon, explained and gave instruction for its use, without making it clear why it should be necessary at all. Part 2 is therefore a wholly admirable treatise, only for one who has already mastered the groundwork and gained some experience of the practice of the art. Crowley's opinion later changed as he realized the limitations of Part 1, end quote. Of course, time showed that Part 1, although it did really give the essentials of yoga in the simplest possible language, was hardly more than an outline. More, it did not correlate yoga with general philosophies. 8 lectures on yoga have, I believe, remedied this. He concluded that, end quote, to study yoga, you have my Book 4, Part 1, and my 8 lectures on yoga. Then there is Vivekananda's Raja Yoga, and several little-known Hindu writers. These latter are very practical and technical, but one really needs to be a Hindu to make much use of them. The former is very good indeed if you remember to switch off when he slides into sloppiness, which is luckily not very often, unquote. Elsewhere in Magic Without Tears, he amplified these remarks, end quote. I do not think I am going too far if I say that Part 1 of Book 4 and my 8 lectures on yoga form an absolutely sufficient guide to the useful practice of the subject. Anything else is almost certain to operate as a distraction. We have already seen how Crowley considered Part 2 unsatisfactory as an introduction to magic. Of Chapter 9, The Pentacle, he wrote, end quote, I cannot make up my mind whether I like it. At the best, it is very far from being practical instruction. The chapter on the layman, chapter 15, is even worse, unquote. He was, however, satisfied with Part 3, end quote. Since Part 3 came out of the voices of detraction have been dumb, I really do believe that I've covered the ground at last, unquote. Crowley wrote that the magical student really needed very few books, end quote. To study Magic Book 4, Parts 2 and 3, Magic in Theory and Practice, and 4, The Equinox of the Gods, add the Book of Thoth, and there you are. Of other writers, you have the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, and any of the works of Eliphas Levi, but that's all, unquote. Crowley had little to say about Part 4, but it is clear that after over 20 years of exhorting his students to study the Book of the Law, he did not at first know what to make of a comment that forbade such study. But it eventually led him back to his own original thesis concerning Revelation, nowhere as lucidly outlined as in Part 1 of Book 4. He carried this thesis to its inexorable conclusion. I'm now on the last page. Wow, we made it, y'all. The Transcendence of Logic. In 8 lectures on yoga, Crowley sought to reconcile what years later he had symbolized as the soldier and the hunchback. Exclamation point and question mark. Revelation and interpretation, end quote. It is no use discussing the results of yoga, whether that yoga be the type recommended by Lao Tzu or Patanjali or St. Ignatius Loyola, because for our first postulate we have that these subjects are incapable of discussion. To argue about them only causes us to fall into the pit of because, and there to perish with the dogs of reason. The only use, therefore, of describing our experiences is to enable students to get some sort of idea of the sort of thing that is going to happen to them when they attain success in the practices of yoga. What operated the conversion of St. Paul was the vision on the road to Damascus. It is particularly significant that he disappeared into the desert of Arabia for 3 years before coming forward as the apostle to the Gentiles. St. Paul was a learned rabbi. He was the favorite pupil of the best expositor of the Hebrew law, and in the single moment of his vision, all his arguments were shattered at a single stroke. We are not told that St. Paul said anything at the time, but went quietly on his journey. That is the great lesson, not to discuss the results. Those of you who possess a copy of the Equinox of the Gods, Book 4, Part 4, may have been very much surprised at the extraordinary injunction in the comment, the prohibition of all discussion of the book. I myself did not fully understand that injunction. I do so now, unquote. This brings the thesis of Part 1 full circle, from a general discussion of mystical revelation through an exhaustive examination of mystical and magical theories and techniques to a case study, the reception of the Book of the Law, In the light of Crowley's remarks quoted above, the comment is thus the capstone, not only of Part 4 of Book 4, but of Book 4 as a whole. Crowley named his system magic with a K to avoid the messy connotation of occultism, and would have agreed with some of occultism's more perceptive critics, such as the Cambridge classicist E.R. Dodds, who wrote that, and quote, "Occultism is to be distinguished from the modern discipline of psychical research, which attempts to eliminate occultism by subjecting supposedly occult phenomena to rational scrutiny, and thus either establishing their subjective character or integrating them with the general body of scientific knowledge," unquote. Crowley's work cannot be accurately termed psychical research, as the term today connotes the field of parapsychology. He preferred the usage scientific illuminism, as his system applies scientific method to all spiritual phenomena, including the experience of God in all its variety. The mathematician David Hilbert remarked somewhere that the importance of a scientific work can be measured by the number of previous publications it supersedes. Time will tell whether Book 4 will forever inhabit the literature of occultism or find a measure of acceptance in the intellectual mainstream as Crowley intended. He was prepared to be patient. In explaining Book 4's curious title, he wrote, and quote, "The idea of 4 was due to my observation of St. Peter's in Rome. It is built with an eye unwavering from that number. Also 4 means, on the political plane, temporal power. This book was then, according to Abul Diz, to receive worldly success. It is my fault if it did not. Still, these are early days to judge of that. Love is a law, love under will." Hymenaeus Beta, Frater Superior OTO. Okay. All right. Magic without two. Okay, so anyways, we made it to here. So we just read the entire editorial. How many pages did we just do? 84. Well, page 84 of the introduction. Did we start at 1? Let's see. Nah, we started at 23. So we read from page 23 of the preface or introduction. So, Yeah. So 61 pages. 61 is Ain. So 61 pages. We just read 61 pages. We did it, y'all. Thank you, everyone, that we just read the editor's comment of Liber ABA. Okay, Book 4. And I'm excited because I want to work through Liber ABA with everyone. That's really cool. So more stuff to come. And then on my Patreon, I'm going to be doing more like my Thoth Tarot on my Patreon. But I think I'm going to start working through Liber ABA. I think that's how I'm going to go about it, I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I approach, like, bringing this stuff in? And I think maybe it's better to just read the Libers or the Libri and just let them speak for themselves. I think a good thing to do is just work through Liber ABA. I really love these readings, and so yeah, I mean, that's it for today, or for now. More stuff probably coming out later. Thank you, everyone. Dang, how long was that? We read the editorial comment, and more stuff to come, y'all. So that is, I'm going to put this on my channel too. So thank you, everyone that was there with me for that. And I'll see y'all in the next video. That was an honor. We just read the editorial comment. I've actually took the cover off. But, to Magic Book 4, Liber ABA. I love it. We're going to be working through this together. It's going to be awesome. So more stuff to come, y'all. Have a great morning.